Hello friends. This is the Ani Fanfics. How are you all? So we are back with part 2 on movie on What If Naruto Summoned the Master of Wolf Clan. But before we begin, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin. In the land of forests, letting out a slight sigh, Naruto brought a bottle of rice wine up to his lips and took a long swig, his face scrunching up at the taste of the alcohol. Putting the bottle down on the table in front of him, he then slid it over to Kin, who like him grabbed the bottle and took a drink, her own reaction somewhat milder than Naruto's due to her senses not being as sharp. "So what are you going to do?" Kin asked as she handed the bottle back to Naruto, a curious expression on her face as she referred to the invitation they had received earlier that day. "Are you going to join up with those Akatsuki guys, or tell them to go fuck themselves?" Naruto snorted in amusement at that, absent-mindedly picking the bottle up again. Not drinking from it this time though, instead merely toying around with the bottle. Not really paying attention to much else. Currently the two of them were sat in a bar in Nagasota, the capital city of the land of forests. All around them there were dozens of soldiers, all of them celebrating, cheering and drinking, toasting their victorious campaign against the root shinobi. The journey back from the military camp after the fall of the last base had been swift, especially for Kin and Naruto, who as shinobi could far outpace normal people. Even now 12 hours later there were still soldiers returning from the camp and likely would be for several hours to come. The two of them had originally come to Nagasota to collect the money owed to them for services rendered, 1,000,000 ryo, enough money to comfortably live off for a year or so. Normally after collecting the money from their client, or the daimyo's treasurer in this case, they would be off. Naruto not liking being in overly crowded cities, usually preferring small towns, rural villages or woodlands, quieter places where his senses would not be overwhelmed by the noise and stench of humanity. With Kin happily accompanying him, preferring his company to that of anyone else, plus having grown up in a small logging camp, she too was not entirely comfortable with big cities. This time however they had chosen to remain within the city, finding a small bar in one of the seedier parts of the settlement they had set up camp. Kin ordering some food and drinks as they monopolized a table in the corner of the room, ignoring the revelries of the returning soldiers as they instead focused on the issues at hand. Earlier that day, just after the destruction of the final root base, Naruto, Kin and another shinobi, Deidara, a brash and obnoxious missing nin who had been working with them, had been given an offer. A man by the name of Pain had approached them, offering them a position in his organization, the Akatsuki. An organization that was apparently formed of S-rank shinobi and whose purpose was primarily to hunt down and capture Jinchuriki, all in the quest of reaching some kind of true peace, as if that ever actually existed. According to their brief conversation with Pain, members of the organization in return for their compliance were offered anything they wanted, whether it be money, research material, literally anything they wanted they were given. All they had to do was fulfill the missions given to them, whether that be taking on high-paying jobs to build up the Akatsuki's finances or hunt down and capture Jinchuriki, all for some as of yet unknown reason. Though judging by what they had seen of Pain so far, it would not be pleasant for the Jinchuriki. When Kin had first heard the offer she had assumed that Naruto would take it up immediately. After all, Naruto was all about the hunt. He loved hunting down and fighting powerful opponents, using them as a benchmark to test his strength. On top of that he would be able to continue his bounty missions and mercenary work, only this time he would have the support of an organization of S-rank shinobi at his back. This group seemed like something Naruto would be happy to be a part of, even if only for a while. Instead though Naruto hadn't replied at first, instead simply stating that he had to collect his payment for the mission. Hearing that Kin had been worried that this Pain man, the shinobi who proclaimed himself a god, would kick off. After all, the man hadn't looked like the patient type, which considering the sheer amount of power he emitted, more than even Naruto, would probably not work out well for them. Yes, just being in his presence Kin had come to the conclusion that as they were now neither team stood much a chance of beating Pain, not even if they worked together. Plus on the off chance that they did beat him, they would then have an organization of rank shinobi after their heads. Surprisingly though, in response to Naruto's statement, Pain had only nodded his head, before emotionlessly telling them that they could collect their payment and then he would expect an answer the next day. The way he had said it though gave Kin no illusions about just what answer he expected. This was why they were here, hidden away in a dark and shady bar, drinking, because tomorrow they knew that Naruto would have to give Pain his answer. Their other companion Deidara he had not been anywhere near as cautious as the other two. After hearing just a brief description of what the group was about he had signed up, declaring it an opportunity to hone his skills and show the world just what true art was. Pausing for a second after hearing Kin's question, Naruto eventually replied, a slight frown etched on his face as he turned to look at her. His amber eyes trailing down Kin's lithe form before coming to rest on her face, looking into her eyes as he simply shrugged. I'm not sure. Kin paused as she heard that, a look of concern passing across her face. In the time she had known Naruto he had never once shown a moment of doubt. He was always sure of himself, making decisions quickly and then sticking with it come what may. That was one of the things she respected most about Naruto, his conviction. Once he had decided on something he would never falter.
Kin was proof enough of that. Naruto had decided to take her on as a companion, and not once in all the time they had spent together had he shown any doubts on his decision. Even when Kin had lost her temper at him, or had made a mistake. Once in one of her weaker moments she had asked him why this was, why he didn't just ditch her. After all he was without a doubt strong enough to do whatever he wanted, with her only acting as a burden.
In response he had only said that she was a member of his pack. That was all he had said, but the sheer conviction with which he had said it, well she had known then and there that she would never leave him no matter what. As she could tell he would never do the same to her. It was because of this that she was so concerned, as since he had been given the offer Naruto had not been as decisive as usual. For one reason or another Pain's offer had caused him to worry and she didn't like seeing him worry. Why? I would have thought this was something you would really want. You would have the chance to hunt down some of the strongest shinobi around. Kin replied, trying to find out what had him so concerned.
That's true, Naruto replied with a nod of his head, putting the bottle down and absent-mindedly looking around, noticing as he did that there was a large circle of space around them. Naruto's baleful presence having scared off any revelers. Kin waited for a moment and when it didn't look like Naruto was going to continue she rolled her eyes. So what's the problem then? Why are you so concerned? Kin pressed her dark eyes on Naruto, noticing as she did that his own amber eyes had shifted to a glowing red showing that he was now using his dujutsu for some reason.
Glancing around the room, Naruto then turned his attention back to Kin. A strange expression on his face as he considered what he would say next. As he was doing this he was thinking himself about just what he would do. A part of him wanted to join the Akatsuki. He could hone his skills tracking down Jinchuriki plus fighting the village shinobi who would no doubt try and protect their prized weapons. On top of that it would give him an opportunity to check out some S-rank shinobi, allowing him to assess their skills in case he ever decided he wanted to fight them. Already he could feel his blood pumping faster at the very thought. Ever since he had first left the Black Forest and heard of the existence he had wanted to track down and fight an S-rank shinobi. The strongest of the strong. On the other hand though he was a Jinchuriki himself, although the Nine-Tails' presence was fully masked by his constant usage of Sage Mode that didn't stop him from being what he was. This meant that if the Akatsuki were capturing the tailed beasts, then they would need the Nine-Tails and Naruto was not about to let himself be captured. This meant that if Naruto did join the Akatsuki he would be in constant danger of being discovered. This gave Naruto two options. The first was that he could join the Akatsuki and track down other Jinchuriki, honing his skill as he did so all the while hiding his own status as a Jinchuriki. With his abilities Naruto was very confident that he could hide the existence of the Nine-Tails, and if anyone ever did find out by then he hopefully would be strong enough and knowledgeable enough about the other members by then to kill them if they threatened him or Kin. That was his first option. His second option was to reject the offer entirely and hope for the best. If he did that he strongly suspected that Pain wouldn't accept his rejection and would attack him and try to kill him. After all the Akatsuki were going after the tailed beasts, the creatures were incredibly powerful weapons wielded by the most powerful of the shinobi villages. It was likely that this Pain would want to keep his group's existence a secret for as long as he could before revealing himself. This meant that there could be no loose end so either Pain would try to force Naruto into joining or he would attempt to silence him. At the moment Naruto knew he would lose if he faced off with Pain. Naruto wasn't exactly sure why but something about the man worried him. It wasn't just the sheer amount of power he exuded, no it was those eyes he had. Just looking into them Naruto knew he would not be able to defeat the man, not yet, not until he knew more about his abilities. Not that Naruto was about to voice these concerns out loud. After all, he was being watched and had been since he had left Pain's presence. He didn't know what it was, but something was watching him. His Dujustu had picked them up. What they were, though, he had no idea. It didn't look human, but nor did it look or feel like anything he had ever seen before. Even now, as he and Kin sat here drinking, he knew the creature was watching them, potentially listening into their conversation. More than that, whatever it was would likely report everything it had seen and heard to Pain, meaning Naruto would have to watch what he says. Which was something Naruto didn't like doing at all. Still, for the sake of Kin and himself, he had to do it.
Letting out a sigh, Naruto knew his only real choice for the moment was to adapt and survive. His decision made, Naruto turned to look at Kin, a slight smile tugging its way across his face as he noted the well-concealed concern on the girl's face. Shaking his head, Naruto finally replied, "I don't like the idea of joining, but somehow I don't think we have much a choice."
"You picked up on that too, did you?" Kin replied dryly, taking the bottle from Naruto and having another swig. "I say we join up, make a ton of money, and then get out when we can." "You're saying that like you think they will let us leave?" Naruto replied in amusement, almost certain that this is the kind of group that one does not simply leave. Not that it would stop Naruto from trying if he found he didn't like it.
Kin shrugged at that, not sure what else to say. She couldn't really see a major problem with joining up. It would give a bit more purpose to their lives than just roaming around the different countries taking mercenary jobs and hunting bounties.
Then again, she knew that joining up would mean there would now be some restrictions on them, as although they would be able to do as they pleased, they would be assigned missions occasionally that they would have no choice but to take. She knew that that would grate on both her and Naruto. Still, to Kin it seemed that the pros outweighed the cons, or at least they did at the moment. Before anything else could be said between them, they were interrupted by the unwelcome sight of Deidara walking into the bar. The blonde-haired teen, now wearing a knee-length black cloak with red clouds on it as he swaggered forwards, his long blonde hair standing out against the darkness of his outfit. Looking around the room as he entered, Deidara quickly locked on to where Naruto and Kin were sitting, a smirk passing across his face at the sight of his two former companions. Turning, Deidara began to approach them, ignoring the scowl on Naruto's face as he instead waltzed forward and took a seat on their table without a care in the world. "So still sulking in here, yeah?" Deidara said, a grin on his face as he looked over at Naruto, before turning to look at Kin. "Ever think about ditching the savage and hooking up with a real man?" Kin rolled her eyes as she heard that, easily shrugging off Deidara's clumsy attempt at flirting. He was not the first guy to try it on. Over her time traveling with Naruto, a number of men had tried it on with her. Most of them only tried it once. "Tell me, Deidara, have you ever seen a man be beaten to death with his own spinal cord?"
Deidara frowned as he heard that, a look of confusion passing across his face. "What, no? Why did you ask something like that?"
Kin smiled sweetly as she heard that, her louder-than-normal comment having attracted the attention of more than Deidara as a number of other patrons looked over at her. Noticing her dark eyes, pale flawless skin, raven-colored knee-length hair, and sharp striking features. "Because the last guy to try it on with me, well, the last time a guy attempted anything untoward with me, Naruto ripped his spine out and flayed him to death with it."
Deidara paused as he heard that, his one visible eye widening slightly as he looked over at Naruto, remembering as he did the man's monstrous strength as he tore through a solid metal door and ripped skilled shinobi to pieces with his clawed hands. The man was a literal juggernaut, an unstoppable killing machine. Not someone Deidara would want to fight, especially since he suspected that only his most destructive of techniques would affect Naruto. Seeing the suddenly wary look Deidara was sending him, Naruto sent him a grin, revealing his unusually sharp canines and glowing red eyes as he did so. Deidara flinched slightly as he looked into those red eyes, almost as unnerved by them as he had been by Pain's ringed purple eyes. "Yeah, well, I was only being friendly." Kin smiled as she heard that, enjoying the sudden nervousness the usually brash young man was showing. She always enjoyed playing this game on people, especially the overconfident ones. As of yet, Naruto had never needed to step in and kill someone for flirting with her. After all, she was more than capable of looking after herself. Still, it didn't hurt to put up a facade. After all, if people thought she needed Naruto to protect her, well, then they would never suspect it when she slit their throat from behind. That being said, Deidara probably already knew she was strong. After all, they had just worked together earlier that day. Still, she could try and play around with his male ego. So many men like to think of women as weaker and meeker than them. Those men wouldn't last long in a fight with a kunoichi. "So what are you doing here, Deidara?" Naruto spoke up, a hint of amusement in his voice as he watched Kin have her fun. He knew more than most just how deadly a woman could be. Aquila did not become the leader of the Direwolf clan just through her sparkling personality. No, she had won her position through strength, cunning and pure ferocity, and this was the same reason she had remained in power for centuries now.
Can't I drop by and chat to old friends? Deidara replied, an easy smile passing across his face, his previous wariness forgotten as he reached out to take the bottle of rice wine from Kin. Only for the girl to take a long swig from it, a grimace passing across her face as she downed the bottle. Before with a smirk she handed it over to Deidara.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we were friends. Kin spoke up, the grimace on her face fading as she instead just smirked at the slightly peeved expression on Deidara's face as he dropped the empty bottle onto the dirt floor.
And there I was thinking we made a good team. Deidara replied, a slightly whiny note in his voice. What's with the getup? Naruto suddenly asked, his question blunt and to the point, cutting through Kin and Deidara's sniping. Well, what do you think it is? They're my Akatsuki robes, yeah. Deidara replied with a smirk, casually brushing some non-existent dust from the shoulder. They're a bit tacky, don't you think? Kin spoke up, a slight frown on her face as she leant forward and looked at what Deidara was wearing. Well, I think they look cool, yeah. The missing nin replied, sending Kin a slight scowl. You look like a clown, Naruto said brusquely, before forging on as he saw Deidara open his mouth to respond. What are you doing here, Deidara? Deidara paused here, a contemplative expression crossing his face as he thought about what to say. Pain sent me. He knows you have collected your bounty and he wants an answer from you.
Naruto nodded at that, having suspected that much already. No doubt their little stalker had been keeping Pain abreast of just what they were doing, probably so that Pain would know if they tried to run. Where is he?
Deidara stood up from his chair at that, straightening his robes before looking down on Naruto with a smirk. He's outside the city. You're to come to him at once and give him your decision.
Naruto nodded at that, pushing himself to his feet, his back cracking as did so. Before he turned and grabbed his sword from where it had been resting on the floor. Might as well get this over with then.
Deidara nodded at that, his smirk dimming slightly as he glanced at the sword in Naruto's hand. I take it you aren't planning on fighting?
Naruto cocked an eyebrow as he heard that, surprised to sense genuine concern in Deidara's comment. Why you worried about me?
Kin looked over at Naruto at that, a slight frown on her face as she heard the slight hint of surprise in his voice. Anyone else would likely miss it, but over the months Kin had become very much attuned to Naruto's emotions, and something Deidara had said surprised him.
Deidara scoffed in response, as if, though if you were going to try anything I would suggest you don't. This guy is beyond either of us, he is the real deal. I'm talking ridiculously powerful here, and that's coming from me, the former apprentice of the Tsuchikage.
You were the Tsuchikage's former apprentice? Kin suddenly asked disbelievingly, looking him up and down, an amused expression on her face.
Yeah, of course, Deidara said, a grin on his face as he misinterpreted Kin's disbelief for intrigue.
Seeing this, Naruto rolled his eyes, instead walking forwards and passing by Deidara, Kin moving so she was alongside him. This left Deidara behind for a moment, before with a shout he ran after them, trying to keep up.
So what do you reckon of that Deidara guy? Naruto asked curiously, a slightly unfamiliar feeling bubbling up in him as he and Kin continued through the crowds of soldiers. People making way for Naruto, intimidating presence of Naruto before closing back in, allowing Naruto and Kin to move much more swiftly through the city than Deidara, who had to fight through the crowded streets, shouting the occasionally obscenity.
A look of confusion passed across Kin's face as she heard this. The guy's a tool, but he's also a skilled shinobi. I reckon he would be a slippery one to kill if we have to, but not hard once we neutralize those flying, exploding clays things he uses. Naruto nodded at that, having come to the same conclusion. Before they could say any more, the shinobi in question caught up with them. Deidara having had to use his chakra to run up and along the walls, bypassing the crowds and allowing him to catch up with Naruto and Kin just before the main gates. Barely giving him a glance, Naruto passed through the gates, Deidara and Kin following him as he mentally prepared himself for his meeting with Pain. Outside of the city, Pain, as it soon appeared, had been waiting for them in a small grove not far outside of Nagasoda, a blank emotionless expression on his face as he stood in the center of the grove, the wind whipping at his Akatsuki robes. His ringed purple eyes locked on Naruto as he, Kin and Deidara entered the grove, the three of them slowly approaching the silent yet still intimidating figure of Pain. Coming to a stop a few feet away from Pain, Naruto watched as Deidara walked past him and went to stand just to the side and behind the leader of the Akatsuki. Seeing this, Naruto then shifted his attention onto Pain, his eyes narrowing slightly as he did so. "So do you accept my offer of membership into the Akatsuki?" Pain said, getting straight to the point, his deep voice completely empty of any emotion and his purple eyes boring in Naruto's. "Well, I'm not an S rank, so wouldn't that be a problem?" Naruto replied, a curious expression on his face as he tried to figure this Pain guy out. "You are an S rank in everything but name," Pain said bluntly, his expression still stoic. "Will you accept my offer?" "Offer?" Naruto thought in amusement, before he shook the thought out of his head and instead just nodded his head. "We'll join your little group, for now." Pain stared at Naruto at that, before his gaze moved away from him and instead fixed on Kin. "The offer was for you, not for her." "Well, here's the thing. We're a team, so you either accept both of us, or you get neither of us." Naruto replied bluntly. This was something he would not compromise on. Pain's expression didn't change as he heard this. "Very well."
Naruto cocked an eyebrow at that, his hands clenching into fists, even as he tensed up. He wasn't sure what Pain was thinking, but if it came down to a fight he wouldn't go down meekly. He would give it everything he had, using his Sage Mode, Dujutsu, swordsmanship, taijutsu and summons to the maximum. If it came down to a fight, Naruto may not win, but neither would Pain, as if he did lose, Naruto would make sure to rip the man's head off before he died.
If Pain noticed any of this, he didn't show it, instead he just continued speaking. "You may both join, however she will remain with you, you will count as one member within this organization."
Naruto frowned in confusion as he heard that. Why would it matter if there was another member in the organization, and why did he phrase it like he had? Naruto was completely unable to read this man. He displayed no outer emotion and his sage-enhanced sensory abilities were able to pick up nothing from the man. Well, nothing. Expect the insane amount of chakra that was flowing through him, the chakra being based around Pain's eyes and the black piercings that covered his body. Glancing sideways, Naruto met Kin's gaze. The girl in question giving Naruto a slight nod as she took a step closer to him. Looking back over to Pain, Naruto unclenched his fists, before he nodded his head. "Very well then, we'll join the Akatsuki."
Pain nodded at that, his expression once again not changing. Deidara meanwhile gave Naruto and Kin a grin and a thumbs up. Glancing at the two, Naruto's expression remained stoic as he began to make plans about what to do next, and how he would deal with being in the Akatsuki. A few years later in Konoha. It was day like any other in the Hidden Leaf Village. The streets were busy as off-duty shinobi and civilians milled about, shopping and chatting and generally enjoying their lives. The place was idyllic, and had been for more than a decade now. The Hidden Leaf as it stood now, was the strongest of the 5 great shinobi villages, an enviable position, but one they clung onto despite the stiff competition from the most powerful competitors, the Hidden Cloud and Hidden Rock villages. Currently Iruka Amino, a chunin in his mid-20s, was in the Shinobi Academy, doing his duty as a teacher for the up-and-coming shinobi of the future. The next generation of shinobi who, like their parents, would go on to represent Konoha on the world stage. Now Iruka was one of the few shinobi that was entirely content with where he was in life.
He had achieved the rank of chunin at the age of 16 and a few years after that had gone on to become a teacher to the next generation of shinobi in the Hidden Leaf Village. This had taken him off the career track, of course. The lack of fieldwork involved making it all but impossible for him to rise from a chunin to a special junin or a full junin. Still, this wasn't a concern to Iruka. After all, the majority of shinobi finished their career as chunin, with only an exceptional few, the elite, progressing beyond that.
Letting out a sigh, Iruka looked around the classroom as he continued his lecture on the most efficient way to move through desert terrain. The contented smile on his face fading slightly as he looked around at his class, noticing as he did that a number of his students were either not paying attention or in one case actually sleeping.
Gritting his teeth in irritation, Iruka decided he had had enough. Bouncing the eraser for his whiteboard up and down in his hand, he then proceeded to hurl it like one would a kunai at one of the repeat offenders. His target, a skinny, blue-haired academy student, letting out a sudden yelp as the eraser struck him on head, his reaction caused more by shock than any real pain. Iruka having thrown the eraser only hard enough to make the boy wake up, and not enough to actually cause him harm.
Sora, perhaps you could tell us the best way a shinobi team could inconspicuously traverse through the desert regions of Suna. Iruka asked, a vein on his forehead beginning to bulge as he saw the bored look Sora sent him, the look slowly turning into a lazy smirk as he noticed how irritated his teacher appeared to be.
How the hell should I know? I mean, aren't you supposed to be the teacher? If you're asking a student for help, maybe someone needs to tell the Hokage about how bad the teachers here in the academy are. Sora replied sarcastically, a grin on his face as he looked around the room. A couple of the other students chuckling nervously, whilst others winced as they heard Sora's obnoxious comment. Bringing his hand to his head and beginning to massage his temple, Iruka let out a sigh, attempting as he did so to calm himself down before he lost his temper. After all, a teacher should never lose control in front of their students. That was as self-destructive as was possible, as it would show the students that they had gotten to him. Dropping his hand to his side, Iruka fixed his eyes on the boy in question, Sora. The boy was always rude, even to people he liked. Not that he had many that liked him. After all, if his obnoxious personality didn't drive them away, then having the 9 tails sealed inside him certainly would. The mindless tailed beast had originally disappeared 16 years ago, soon after Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage, and his, as it later turned out, pregnant wife Kushina both died stopping the beast. The two of them going down in the annals of the Hidden Leaf's history for their selfless and heroic actions. The beast, though, had not been gone for long, as 7 years later the beast's power was discovered to have been trapped inside Sora.
Apparently it had taken all 12 of the Guardian Shinobi, all of them strong and talented shinobi who had sworn their lives to the protection of the Fire Daimyo in the Land of Fire, to defeat the beast. When the dust cleared, only 4 people were left alive, one of them being the young Sora, who soon after was picked up by Jiraiya of the Sannin and brought back to the Hidden Leaf Village for his own safety. Those in the class and the majority of the civilian population didn't know why Sora's right hand was bandaged like it was, the Hokage having passed a law prohibiting the shinobi who were aware from speaking of it, all in order to ensure Sora could live as good a life as possible. But those who were there years ago when Sora was first brought to the Hidden Leaf knew of the beast-like arm hidden beneath. A small portion of the village's population knew, and although they never did anything directly, they still viewed the boy with an air of suspicion, something that the rest of the village caught onto and like mindless sheep copied. Iruka, as the boy's teacher, had been informed by the Hokage of what Sora was, just in case of an incident. Still though, Iruka saw himself as a teacher first. Which meant he treated Sora as any other student and not as the Jinchuriki of the 9 tails, even if his past experiences made that a little bit difficult. You would know, answer Sora, if you had actually been paying attention. After all, it's what the class has been covering for the last half an hour. Maybe if you were awake, you would know, answer. Sakura, could you please tell me the best way for a shinobi team to pass through desert territory? Mizuki, Iruka's teaching assistant, spoke up. A slight frown on his face as he looked over at Sora, Mizuki having far less sympathy for Sora than Iruka had, despite him not knowing just what the boy was. Well, a shinobi should travel during the night when the desert temperature is lower and with the darkness providing more cover. Sakura, a skinny girl with long pink hair around the same age as Sora, began. A bit startled at first, but getting more confident as she recited what Iruka had literally just taught them. When necessary, a shinobi should sleep during the daytime, using a camouflage sheet to protect them from the sun and allow them to blend in with the surrounding sand. This would allow for the shinobi to conserve water in. Nerd. Sora interrupted loudly, an angry expression on his face as Sakura showed him up, his face flushing red in embarrassment as he heard a couple of the other students around him sniggering into their hands. Sora, detention, Iruka shouted in response, having had enough with Sora for the day. After all, he had decided to treat him as any other student, meaning if he made a fool of himself and interrupted the class, then he would receive the same punishment any other student would get. A half an hour later, it was around 30 minutes later that the class ended, and seeing the exodus of the other students as a potential opportunity to avoid punishment, Sora tried to use the confusion created to escape out of the window, unfortunately for the boy, though he was at a shinobi academy. Meaning that Iruka was easily able to notice Sora's actions and grab the wayward student by the scruff of his shirt before he could disappear and escape his punishment. Currently Sora was in the process of fulfilling that punishment, the boy in question being forced to prepare the classroom for tomorrow's graduation test, which involved bringing in logs that could be used for testing the replacement technique, as well as a number of other easy yet tedious tasks that weren't hard but still had to be done. All of this was being done under the watchful eye of Iruka, who was sat at his desk at the front of the classroom writing out the questions that would be on the written portion of the graduation test. After all, you couldn't just have a set exam that an enterprising student could steal and copy before passing around. You had to make a new one up every year to ensure that only the best and brightest passed. Looking up from his task, Iruka let out a slight sigh as he saw the truculent expression on Sora's face. You know, Sora, your grades as they are won't be able to cushion a failing grade on any portion of the exam tomorrow. I mean, even Shikamaru's grades are higher than yours, and he purposefully coasts through lessons. So what, you think I can't make the cut, huh? Sora retorted, a scowl on his face as Iruka pointed out his failings as a student. Not aware that his teacher was about to try and help him, instead only seeing Iruka as being someone out to get him. Iruka sighed as he heard Sora's response. The boy had a real chip on his shoulder, often assuming that people were out to get him and never understanding that sometimes people were just trying to help.
It's not that you can't make the cut. You have the potential to be a splendid shinobi, maybe even the best of your generation. But you won't be able to leave the academy, let alone become the best shinobi that you can be, unless you start putting more effort in. It's not a threat, this is just a suggestion from teacher to student. Iruka said before he let out another sigh. You're a bright kid, Sora, and have a lot of potential. I just don't want to see you wasting it.
Look, you don't have to pretend to care. I'm used to it. Sora suddenly snapped as he turned around, his temper flaring. I'm not pretending, Sora. Iruka replied, holding back another sigh as he knew Sora would likely have this reaction. The boy only seemed to hear what he wanted to hear. I really do. Looks like I'm done. See you tomorrow, Sora suddenly said, cutting Iruka off as he looked around and saw he had finished his last task, using it as an excuse to leave the room and avoid the caring teacher lecture. Sora knew what happened when he got close to people. Either they got hurt or they hurt him. Sora had decided long ago to go without friends, he didn't need them or want them. With Sora sometime later, a couple of hours later, a once again calmed down Sora was currently napping in one of the trees that bordered Training Ground 7, very close to the memorial stone that honored shinobi who had died serving their village. He had been here for a while, originally coming here to blow off some steam, before deciding to take a nap. Not that his nap lasted long, as Sora was soon woken up by the arrival of another person entering the training ground. Looking down from his position in a tree, Sora looked over irritably at the intruder, quickly recognizing just who it was. The man who had just entered the clearing appeared to be in his early 30s, with a brawny physique and heavily muscled arms. Over his shoulder the man carried a large staff on his back. The sides of this man's head was shaven, leaving some longish brown hair on only the top of his head. Over a simple black shirt, though, the man wore a Jonin flak jacket, though even more prominently displayed was the waistcloth he was wearing that was adorned with the kanji for fire. Looking down at him, Sora easily recognized him as Katane, one of the 3 surviving members of the 12 Guardian Shinobi and someone who Sora had only met a couple of times before when he was much younger. Coming to a stop in front of the tree, the man patiently waited for Sora to acknowledge his presence before speaking. Didn't your teacher recommend studying? I'm not sure sleeping in trees will be on the test tomorrow. Katane, the somewhat famous A-rank shinobi, said, a slight grin on his face as he looked up at Sora. Doesn't matter. Everyone hates me for whatever reason. I doubt they'd let me be a shinobi, even if I was the best in the class. Sora replied bitterly, going off the treatment he received from a number of other shinobi he had come across. He knew he would not be welcomed within the ranks. Katane nodded at that, his smile not dropping. You know, Sora, I knew your father back in the day. Katane began, putting up his hand to stop the question on Sora's tongue as his smile became somewhat fixed. His name was Kazuma, and not only was he one of my comrades, he was also one of my friends. Wait, does that mean my dad was one of the 12 Guardian Shinobi? Sora asked in shock, a stunned expression on his face as he tried to comprehend this new information. Why did no one ever tell me? Only Asuma, Chiriku, and I know. Asuma served the feudal lord until recently. He probably forgot you were still around. You can't blame Chiriku either, he lives at the fire temple up in the mountains doing monk stuff. You were only very young when he died. But still, I thought you were old enough to remember, and for that I apologize. Only recently did I hear that you had no idea. Katane said,
a sorrowful note entering his tone at the thought of leaving a friend's son without any knowledge of just who he is and who his father was.
Hearing all this, Sora was completely speechless, only staring down at Kitane. His expression not changing when the older man began to speak again. Though if I knew Kazuma, he wouldn't want his only son to fail the academy exams. If you manage to pass the test tomorrow, I managed to get an old friend to agree to take you as his student. Did he know my father? Sora asked quickly, desperate for any more information about the father he never knew.
Asuma and Kazuma were as good of friends as they come. I was never quite as close to Kazuma as Asuma was, Kitane said with a slight shrug and earnest expression on his face as he continued to look up at Sora. Asuma will be able to tell you more about your father than I ever could, so pass the test tomorrow and I'll introduce you. Wow, Sora said, suddenly filled with excitement at the thought of hearing more about his father. It was an excitement only an orphan could understand. I'm definitely gonna pass that test tomorrow. Sora continued on excitedly.
Hold up. Kitane said in amusement, holding up his hands to emphasize his point. Asuma did say you had to pass one test to prove that you're more than just Kazuma's son. Asuma wants to see if you're Kazuma's heir. What does that mean? Sora asked, torn between being furious that there was a catch and confused as to what Kitane meant. Like I said earlier, Asuma hasn't heard of you since he's been in the capital of Land of Fire this whole time. He trusts me, but he wants to make sure. There's a technique known only by your father and Asuma. He wants to see if you can pull it off. It isn't a complicated technique, but Asuma has the only remaining scroll detailing how to use it. But we both want you to succeed, so I'll tell you where he keeps it. Kitane finished, the smile never leaving his face as he looked up at the Jinchuriki perched up in the tree above him. Sora was too ecstatic to have heard about his father and have the hope of finding out more to notice anything suspicious with Kitane's story. Instead, he only nodded his head, caught up in the enthusiasm. Sometime later, Sora had been having a great day ever since Kitane had talked to him earlier, his previous frustration with Iruka and his general situation forgotten as he got caught up in the excitement of finding out who he was, and who his father was. Asuma's apartment had been surprisingly easy to break into. The scroll had been somewhat harder to find, but Kitane's instructions hadn't led him wrong, and he had headed out of the village soon after acquiring it, heading to one of the training grounds in the woods. He had forgotten the specific training ground in the excitement of learning a new technique on top of finding out about his father. Sora figured he'd see if this Asuma was all that. If he couldn't find Sora practicing a destructive technique in the woods, then Sora would likely get all the information about Kazuma he could and then train under someone more competent. At the moment though, Sora was just too happy to care about anything beyond learning about his father. Cracking open the scroll, Sora began to read about the flying swallow technique. After more than an hour of practice, Sora was beginning to feel like Kitane had lied to him. This technique wasn't easy at all. Channeling chakra was difficult enough, but wind chakra was proving to be impossible. He hadn't even known that chakra could have an elemental affinity. He had been at it for nearly an hour now, and the claw marks from his weapon, a steel claw, were strewn around the clearing he was training in.
Currently Sora was taking a short break to recover his chakra. After all, he didn't have a huge amount, maybe just about that of an experienced Chunin, and this was a very chakra-consuming technique. In fact, he had used so much chakra that he was currently feeling a little tired, which is why after a couple of minutes of trying to fight off sleep he decided to give into it and have a quick nap.
Sometime later, I wasn't sure what to think when Kazuma's son decided to try and steal from a Junin's home in broad daylight, especially when that home belongs to me. A deep voice suddenly spoke up from just above Sora, waking him up from his nap, a startled expression on his face. If the Uchiha military police were still around, you'd be sleeping in a jail cell, not a forest. Sora sat up and opened his eyes to take in the new arrival, instantly feeling a little tense as he felt an aura of danger surrounding this man in front of him. The man wore a Junin's flak jacket with a Leaf Village forehead protector tied around his head, identifying him as a hidden leaf shinobi. A burning cigarette hung from the man's mouth, and his brown hair stretched down from the top of his head to the bottom of his chin in large sideburns and a small goatee. All of this was lost on Sora, though, once he saw the waistcloth the man was wearing, the one with the kanji for fire emblazoned on it. Sora quickly identifying this man as one of the 12 guardian shinobi. Other than Kitane, the only living members were Asuma and Chiriku, and since Chiriku was apparently living in some monastery somewhere, this could only be Asuma, his father's old friend. Understanding this and sensing the man's irritation, Sora began to feel slightly afraid of being punished by the man he had stolen from. But as the fear began to grow within him, the dangerous aura around Asuma dissipated, the man chuckling slightly as he looked down at Sora, Asuma seeming more amused than angry. I decided to follow the little squirt who thought he could steal from me, set on stopping a potential spy. But I must say, even if you are Kazuma's kid, learning the flying swallow to this degree in such a short time is impressive. Asuma spoke again, his tone slightly more friendly as he looked around the clearing, noting all of the gouges and slices on both the ground and surrounding trees as he did so. Before Sora could respond, 3 poles struck the ground in a triangle around him. Lightning springing from each of the staffs, forming an electric blue cage around the shocked Sora. The action also caused Asuma to suddenly leap backwards, his guard raised as he landed in a crouch a few meters away, his eyes narrowed as he looked into the surrounding woods. Asuma, glad you showed up. Now we can finish this. Kitane spoke up, the man stepping out of the trees, his friendly facade from before fading to revealing a cold expression on his face and flinty eyes as he looked over at Sora. Finish what? What are you on about? Asuma asked in confusion as he looked between his old friend and the trapped Sora. Not at all sure just what was going on here, but definitely ready to get to the bottom of it. We can avenge Kazuma. We can kill the 9 tails. Kitane said, a wild look entering his eyes as he looked from the scared-looking Sora to the frowning Asuma, his hands clenched into fists. What are you talking about? Sora asked, even more confused by just what the hell was going on than Asuma, especially when the dread beast that attacked the village just over 16 years ago, before Sora was even alive, was mentioned. Where does the 9 tails come into any of this? Oh come on Sora. Don't tell me you couldn't figure it out. Your right arm, the looks of distrust, the mysterious disappearance of the 9 tails. No one knows where the 9 tails went right after the attack all those years ago, but it resurfaced to attack the 12 Guardian Shinobi years later. Putting 2 and 2 together yet, Sora. Kitane shouted, his eyes wide and a vicious expression on his face, as he saw Sora's eyes widen with the realization of what Kitane was implying. Let me spell it out for you then, beast. You aren't Kazuma's son Sora, you just took that form after we defeated you. You are the 9-tailed demon fox, the beast that killed our comrades all those years ago, including both Sora and his father Kazuma. Nama, Sato, too, and I defeated you using limelight long enough for the 3rd Hokage and Jiraiya to seal you back up, but that arm is proof that you'll just break that seal soon enough. But now we can end it, me and Asuma have you at our mercy, weakened and alone. Now we can finish you off once and for all. Kitane shouted, blood beginning to drip down from his clenched fists, all rational thought quickly leaving his mind. What? What are you talking about, Kitane? My dad and Jiraiya might not be the seal master the 4th was, but they knows what they're doing. This is Sora, and if you kill him, the beast he's been holding back all these years will be released. It took so much sacrifice to stop the beast before, and you'd see that wasted for some misaimed revenge. Asuma said in disbelief before drawing 2 trench knives out of his kunai pouch, his eyes narrowing as he prepared to fight. I'm sorry Kitane, but I won't let the others have died in vain. Fool. Kitane snarled, spitting on the floor at Asuma's feet. It has you tricked, Asuma. But if you can't see the truth, then you are just in my way. I'm sorry old friend, but you'll have to die alongside the 9 tails. With that said, Kitane drew another staff from his back, the tip splitting into 3 prongs, lightning arching between them as he pointed the weapon at his old comrade, who in response began to channel wind chakra into his knives. Meanwhile, as this was happening, Sora was feeling paralyzed, shocked by the deluge of information he was receiving. Kitane hadn't meant a word he had said earlier. Kitane hadn't wanted to watch over him, or help him become a shinobi. He had just wanted to exhaust Sora for an easy kill. That was why he had lured Sora and Asuma out here and tricked him into trying to learn that ridiculous technique. Also, he could weaken Sora before killing him with Asuma's help. As these thoughts were running through Sora's mind, Asuma and Kitane had engaged one another in combat. The Hokage's son's trench knives clashing repeatedly with Kitane's lightning-enshrouded staff. The wind chakra coating the blade, giving Asuma the technical advantage as wind was strong against lightning. At the same time though, the length of Kitane's staff and his skill with the weapon kept Asuma at a safe distance, creating somewhat of a stalemate as they fought. Just give it up, Asuma. Just let me kill the 9 tails. There's no need for us to fight. Kitane shouted over the crackling of the lightning as he swung his staff round, the chakra metal staff being repelled by Asuma's wind-infused blades. Not a chance. Asuma shot back, jumping back to try and tip the scales. Asuma's hands flying through a number of rapid hand seals as he did so. This was an action Kitane copied as they faced off several meters apart, both of them completing their two different elemental techniques at the same time. Fire style. Ash pile burning. Lightning style. Raging bolt. A large sphere of lightning formed over Kitane's head as he unleashed his attack, the lightning orb crackling with power before it exploded, a bolt of lightning hurtling through the air towards Asuma. In response, Asuma opened his mouth and breathed out large black cloud of what looked like smoke at Kitane, the smoke acting as a cover that allowed Asuma to deftly avoid Kitane's attack before retreating from sight. I always knew you were a coward, but this is a new low. Even for you, Asuma. Kitane shouted, his voice almost hysterical as he whirled around in the smoke, clearly searching for Asuma. Suddenly, Asuma spoke up, his voice coming from seemingly every direction, making Kitane twirl around, his crackling weapon held up in front of him. Shame you were always too focused on your berserker charges to notice the end of this technique. Asuma said, the tone of his voice flat, neither victorious nor angry. With that said, an audible click was heard as Asuma hit the flint he had embedded in his tooth, a spark being released. The resulting spark was enough to expose the smoke for what it actually was, a highly flammable ash. The resulting explosion destroyed the area, and for once Sora was glad for the lightning walls surrounding him, as the walls provided him with protection from the fiery explosion that tore up the ground and blackened the surrounding trees. Asuma spoke again as the smoke cleared. Looks like you let your guard down at the end. With that said, he leapt down from the tree he had been crouched in, entering the clearing cautiously as he looked around for any sign of Kitane. Seeing none, he walked over to Sora's prison and sliced one of the pillars of the lightning field clean in half, ending the technique. Who let his guard down at the end? Lightning style. Lightning eruption. Kitane's voice suddenly shouted, making Sora and Asuma twist around in shock. What? Asuma exclaimed as the ground beneath his feet exploded, bolts of lightning erupting upwards. Kitane emerged from the remaining smoke, several dark red burns on his arms and face, and his clothing badly burnt and shredded, but otherwise unharmed. The electricity from Kitane's technique shot up from the ground, electrocuting Asuma and bringing him to his knees with a gasp, blood spraying forth from his mouth. As it was, Asuma had only managed to remain conscious through copious amounts of wind chakra being pumped through his body, the best he was able to do at such short notice. Kitane laughed at his former comrade's sorry state, any compassion he might have felt worn away by the madness that had gripped him. As if I didn't know what your techniques do. We were comrades for years. Now move aside so I can end the nine tails once and for all. No, Kazuma wouldn't want this, Kitane. Sora isn't the nine tails. I can't say I know him well, but Sora is Sora, no one else. And Sora is our friend's son. I'll die before I let you kill him, Asuma shouted, awkwardly staggering to his feet, his grip on his trench knives tightening. Well then I'll just kill you first. Lightning style. Thunderclap. Lightning began to cover Kitane's hands as he finished the hand seals for his technique. Without pausing, Kitane rushed forward, his arms held behind him ready to be brought forward, lightning running up and down them as he closed in on Asuma, preparing to kill the man with a single final blow. Sora's eyes widened as he saw this taking place, a look of horror crossing in his face, before without any thought at all he lunged forward. Kitane's eyes flickered to Sora as he saw his movements, an ugly look crossing his face as he saw Sora make a desperate slash at him with his claw-like weapon. It only took Kitane a single look to see that the attack would fall at least a good foot short of him. Shifting himself mid-attack, Kitane went to strike Sora instead of Asuma, hoping to kill the beast now and finish this whole tragic affair. Allowing the boy's metal claws to pass by harmlessly, Kitane went in for the kill. Or he would have, if a sharp pain hadn't suddenly spread across his chest. Looking over at Sora, Kitane quickly noticed the red chakra coating the blades of his claws, extending a good foot and a half past the end of the tip of the serrated blades. Looking down, Kitane noticed the 3 parallel slashes running across the front of his chest. He had only a second to marvel at the fact that Sora had somehow managed to pull off a bastardized version of the flying swallow technique despite having had the scroll for barely more than an hour. That was the last thought he had before a far stronger, and far more experienced user of the flying swallow struck him square in the chest. Flying swallow. Straight line. Asuma muttered to himself as his twin blades struck Kitane's chest, the wind-sharpened blades cutting through flesh, muscle and bone like a hot knife through butter. With a final grunt, Asuma followed through with his strike, the two blades tearing out of Kitane's body, causing his top half to fall backwards to the ground with a sickening thud, whilst his lower half collapsed forward. Asuma's wind blades having cut Kitane in half. From the side, the exhausted Sora looked at the scene in front of him with shock, his eyes widening as blood began to pool out of Kitane's body and soak into the ground. Feeling the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, Sora retched once before turning to the side and throwing up. "Come on, Sora. As much as I'd love to collapse here and rest, we'd best report this to the Hokage," Asuma said, placing a strong hand on Sora's shoulder. Sora could only swallow and nod as Asuma started to walk away, Sora stumbling after him, wiping the bile from around his mouth. Looking over his shoulder at the young blue-haired boy, Asuma gave him a faint smile. "Good work back there, Sora. The flying swallow isn't easy to learn, so, good job." Despite all that he had been through, Sora found a grin creeping across his face. In the Hokage's tower, within the Hokage's tower in the center of Konoha, Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage and current leader of the Hidden Leaf, looked into a small crystal ball in front of him, a slight frown on his face as he cut off his chakra. The technique he had been fueling fading away, just as the image of Asuma's and Sora disappeared. Hiruzen, having just watched the entire confrontation with Kitane after having been clued into Sora's actions by his son, Asuma. Settling back into his chair, his pipe in his hand, Hiruzen used a low-level fire technique to light his pipe. Absent-mindedly sucking on the wooden tip, puffing out a bit of smoke as he did so, a slight frown on his face. The story of Sora was truly a sad one that only Jiraiya, Chiriku and himself knew fully, and if Hiruzen had anything to say about it, that was how it would remain. After all, this secret involved the safety and prosperity of the Hidden Leaf and was a secret worth killing over. During the Nine Tails attack on the Leaf Village 16 years ago, some of the beast's chakra was scattered throughout the village. Sora's father, Kazuma, who had been a Junin here at the time, had taken the initiative and collected the chakra before sealed it into Sora's body a few years after the attack, all in the hope of producing a partial copy of the Nine Tails, turning Sora into a pseudo-Jinchuriki. It was an action that Hiruzen had sanctioned after Kazuma had told him what he had done. After all, from what Jiraiya had discovered from his toad summons, Minato on the night of the Nine Tails attack had attempted to seal the Nine Tails within his son. Whether he succeeded or not was unknown, but what Hiruzen did know was that Minato and Kushina were dead, as too was their newborn son. As for the Nine Tails, that was gone, completely vanished. This had left the Hidden Leaf without a Jinchuriki, which for a great village was a major problem. After all, for all the rhetoric and stigma surrounding them, Jinchuriki were principally incredibly powerful weapons, shinobi and war deterrents. If it were found that the Hidden Leaf no longer possessed the strongest of them, well, the other shinobi villages would begin circling them like vultures. It would put the entire village in danger. As such, Hiruzen had begrudgingly agreed to Kazuma's actions. Of course, a few years after the implantation of the Nine Tails chakra, Sora had gone berserk, the demonic chakra sealed within him getting loose and almost taking control. This had ended up destroying the fire temple where Sora was being kept for the time being, a place otherwise believed to be an indestructible fortress. It had taken all 12 guardian shinobi to stop Sora's rampage, giving both Jiraiya and himself time to seal the beast up, limited as they were by the need to keep him alive. This had led to a number of them dying and Hiruzen making the choice to have Jiraiya redo Sora's seal, replacing Kazuma's version with his own one, based off of the notes Minato had left behind. After that, he had kept Sora here in the Hidden Leaf, somewhere where he could keep an eye on the pseudo-Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Letting out another puff of smoke, Hiruzen couldn't help but lament the deaths and pain caused by his decisions. Unfortunately, though it had to be done, for the good of the Hidden Leaf. He could only wish that Minato's son had survived. After all, with his Uzumaki heritage and his parentage, he would truly have been a sight to behold. In a hidden location, miles away from the Hidden Leaf, 10 shadowy figures gathered atop the fingertips of a massive statue, their bodies seemingly made of darkish purple energy, with only their eyes being clearly visible through the technique that allowed them all to gather here. The leader of the group, a figure stood atop the right thumb, was the first one to speak, his purple-ringed eyes looking around at the other figures he had summoned before him. "Since we are gathered here, I can only assume that Zetsu and Sasori have found the targets. Am I correct?" Pain finally asked, his deep voice echoing around the cave as he looked over at the left hand. "Indeed, we've just located the Nine Tails Jinchuriki. Yeah, he was really good at hiding, but we finally got him to use the Nine Tails chakra. Yeah. Thanks for letting us use that Kitane guy's Sasori. Answered the figure standing on the little finger of the right hand, his yellow eyes looking around the room as he spoke with two distinct voices, one of which was deep and serious, with the other being higher pitched.
A hunched-over figure standing on the left thumb of the statue spoke up next in a deep, raspy voice. Well, you're not welcome. That one was a useful spy, not that he knew. But desperate times call for desperate measures. The Nine Tails has certainly kept us waiting, and I hate waiting. Now that we have identified the targets, it will be up to you to gather them. Wait until the beast before yours has been captured to move, but once that requirement is met, take as much time as you will. It will make little difference. But do not strike in a way to draw attention. The Akatsuki must remain in the shadows a bit longer if we are to succeed in bringing true peace to this world. Pain spoke again, his voice echoing around the cavern.
I'm just surprised you managed to find him at all. He successfully evaded the two best spymasters on the continent for over 16 years. A tall, heavily muscled figure that stood on the left little finger said, his amber eyes narrowed in a sharp tone in his voice as he fixed his eyes on the figure with two voices. We are Akatsuki. A female voice spoke up from the right middle finger, her voice sounding slightly bored as her unique orange eyes fixed on the one who had just spoken, an odd emotion hidden with their depths. The only time we do not do good jobs is when we do perfect jobs. Collect the information on your targets. We start with the Seven Tails. Dismissed. Pain said, suddenly cutting off all other conversation, the tone of his voice brooking no compromise. Nodding their heads, the shadowy figures began faded into nothingness, the demonic statue slipping into the ground, leaving no evidence that anyone had ever been there.
With Naruto in the land of water. Opening his eyes, Naruto once again became fully aware of his surroundings. Even after 3 years he was still not fully sure of Pain's communication technique.
Often finding it very disorientating. Stretching slightly, Naruto pushed himself up from where he had been previously sat, leaning against the trunk of a tree. His actions causing Deidara, who like him was coming out of the trance caused by Pain's technique, to fall to the side and land in the dirt, the blonde-haired man sprawling on the ground and letting out several curses.
Deidara having been assigned as Naruto and Kin's partner, the Mad Bomber having become somewhat friends with the two, even if Kin ignored his every attempt at flirting and Naruto threatened him with death or dismemberment every other day. Theirs was a strange friendship, though maybe not when it came to dealing with S-rank shinobi, which by this point all three of them could easily be classified as.
So how did the meeting go? Kin asked from a few feet away, causing Naruto to turn to look at her, ignoring the still cursing Deidara as he did so. His eyes locking on Kin, even as a sudden heat began to flood his body.
The now 16-year-old Kin, now clad in Akatsuki robes, was crouched over next to a campfire. Her raven hair tied back in a ponytail. Her dark eyes turning to look at Naruto, the light of the fire revealing her flawless porcelain skin and her delicate beautiful features. A slight smirk tugged at her features as she saw Naruto looking, Kin absent-mindedly pushing herself to her feet. Enjoying the feeling on Naruto's piercing amber eyes as he followed her movements, her heart beginning to beat faster as she did so. The now 6'2" tall man who like her was wearing Akatsuki robes, was standing just a few feet from the 5'2" Kin, his wild silver hair and amber eyes gleaming in the light of the nearby fire. Well? Kin asked, putting her hand on her hip as she gave Naruto an expectant look, pushing aside any irritation she was previously feeling at being unable to take part in the meeting herself, due to her not wearing the Akatsuki ring. Instead, she was happy that Naruto was once again up and about, even if that did mean she would have to tolerate Deidara's presence. We're ready to begin. They've found the Nine Tails. Naruto finally replied, an oddly relieved grin spreading across his face. Interpreting his grin to mean he was happy that their 3 years of waiting and wandering was over, 3 years of pretty much doing exactly what they were doing before, only with the added irritant of Deidara's presence. Finally they were going to start the exciting stuff. I was getting bored of waiting. Yeah, me too. Naruto replied, sending Kin a grin. As much as he enjoyed taking S-class jobs, he was starting to get restless. Now though, things could really start happening, especially now the Akatsuki had somehow found a Nine Tails Jinchuriki. Despite Naruto being positive that he was in fact the only one, something that no human, not even Kin, his closest friend and confidant, knew. After all, the knowledge of that particular secret could put her in danger, and the Naruto would rather die than let that happen.
So what happens now then? Kin asked as she sidled up to Naruto, her hand absent-mindedly trailing down his chest.
Fighting down the desire he felt rising up in him at his friend's actions, Naruto instead focused on the question. Now we start hunting Jinchuriki. With Naruto. Okay, so let me get this straight. Your plan is that we just waltz into perhaps one of the, if not the most heavily defended hidden village in the world. Not only uninvited though, but also in full Akatsuki regalia as well. Deidara asked incredulously, a disbelieving look on his face as he stared at the amused-looking Naruto in front of him. Really, that's your plan? You forgot about the whole, dropping hints about how we're looking for the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki whilst we are there bit too. Kin added in dryly, the pretty, dark-haired girl, perhaps for the first time ever on Deidara's side as she too looked at Naruto incredulously. That's the general gist of the plan. Naruto replied back just as dryly, a bored look on his face as he looked over at the other two, his amber-colored eyes shifting from the tall, blonde-haired Deidara, resplendent in his Akatsuki robes, to his loyal partner Kin, similarly dressed though with subtle adjustments to allow for her busty physique, light armor and blade. Though you are forgetting a crucial point. Oh really, what? Are we going to carry a big sign with us saying, please try and kill us? As if the rest of your plan wasn't already saying that. Deidara responded sarcastically, a mocking tone to his voice.
Shut up, Deidara. Kin broke in, her dark eyes turning flinty as she heard the mocking tone to his voice. Nobody was allowed to mock Naruto, nobody except her of course.
What did you just say, Pipsqueak? Deidara snapped back angrily, his eyes narrowing as he looked over at Kin. Only for the girl to completely ignore him as she instead looked over to where Naruto was. The silver-haired man, currently sitting on the ground at the base of a tree, several miles away from the border of the Leaf Village.
What did you mean before? What are we missing? Kin asked, an expectant expression on her face.
The Leaf Village has just been through a minor war. Their Hokage is dead, as are nearly 100 of their other shinobi. They're currently leaderless and weakened. Naruto replied, his mind going back to the report Zetsu, another member of the Akatsuki, had given him. One about how the Hidden Sound Village and the Hidden Sand Village had tried to invade the Leaf. With the orchestrator of the invasion, Orochimaru, having killed Hirsuen Sarutobi during the end of conflict.
Surely that would just mean that their security will be tighter than ever to compensate for that. If we blatantly enter a recently war-torn village like you're suggesting, then we'll have to face off against an entire hidden village, and that is a fight we can't win. Kin responded, her brow furrowed as she looked over at Naruto, absently playing with the end of her long ponytail as she tried to work out what her closest, only friend was up to.
Yeah, being found out is the point. If people know we're in the village looking for the Jinchuriki, they'll get him out of there as fast as they can. When you chase your prey, they always attempt to get back to their home, a place of safety, but when you invade their home, what do they do then? Naruto asked as he pushed himself to his feet, bringing his clawed hand up to brush some twigs and leaves off of his Akatsuki robes as he did so. They leave their home and attempt to find a new place to hide. Kin replied, a look of comprehension on her face, before she frowned again. But surely the three of us can't pose such a threat to a hidden village that they would take their main weapon out of it. We don't have to pose a threat to the whole village, just to the security of their Jinchuriki, and considering the Leaf Village is leaderless and undermanned, I believe that moving our target is exactly what they'll do.
After all, they don't want a massive fight breaking out in the village, not just because of the damage we'll cause, but also because of the impact it'll have on their reputation. Naruto replied back, before he began moving through the forest, the other two following him as he took to the trees, picking up his pace as the three rapidly ate up the miles. Besides, Pain gave us permission to put Akatsuki on the map. If some people see us, it's no big deal, not now that we've become a bit more proactive in hunting down the Jinchuriki.
You know, they might have already moved him. After all, we're not the only ones hunting the Jinchuriki, and apparently one of their shinobi, Jiraiya of the Sannin, is quite the spymaster. Kin said, the girl having been told such by Zetsu, the creepy plant-like man who was also a member of the Akatsuki. Then we'll improvise. After all, they'll likely send someone to warn our target if we make ourselves known. Then we can just follow them and track our target down that way. Naruto replied, a similar thought having already come to him when he was thinking of the best way to get the apparent Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. which he was still kind of confused about. After all, he was under the impression that he was the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Look, yeah, I'll go along with you on this one. Deidara spoke up, the scowl on his face showing the other two that he didn't like it. I mean, my art could probably level a city, but stealth and kidnappings, they're not my strong suit, yeah. You're the ones into that kind of shit.
Stealth and hunting, I'm good at. Naruto acknowledged, with a nod. Kidnapping, not so much. I don't usually leave my prey alive.
Well then you better practice a bit of restraint. Kin replied, a slight smile on her face as she looked over to Naruto. Because I doubt that Pain would be happy if you kill the Jinchuriki.
Yeah, he'll probably skin you alive if you do that, Deidara added in mockingly.
He could try, Naruto said bluntly, a stoic expression on his face, one which he used to hide his uncertainty. After all, he had felt the power Pain possessed, and wasn't confident at all that he could survive a fight with him. Certainly not if the other Akatsuki members joined in. Ha, you got balls, Naruto, that's why I like you. Deidara laughed out, quite amused by the silver-haired sage's confidence.
I always did think you swung that way. Kin spoke up dryly. Wait, what? Deidara snapped as he heard Naruto let out a slight chuckle. Nothing. Naruto replied back, before he turned serious once more. Kin does make a good point though. Your incapabilities are the reason why you're partnered with Kin and myself. My abilities are generally short-ranged, powerful, and tend to be incredibly lethal. Kin's are mid-range and based around stealth and skill. Yours, however, are long-ranged and rely entirely on over-the-top explosions and mass destruction.
Which means that when we do find the Jinchuriki, all you need to do is to make sure that he doesn't have time to use a full transformation. Kin added on, an amused expression at the insulting way Naruto had described Deidara's abilities. Not that the blonde seemed to notice.
And what if the Jinchuriki does transform? Deidara asked curiously, looking from the petite Kin to the heavily built Naruto as he did so.
If you fail, then I will have no choice but to do a summoning. Naruto said bluntly, a slight frown on his face as he did so. After all, Fenrir and Aquila were the only summons in the Direwolf clan who could stand against a tailed beast, even if only temporarily.
You know, you bang on about these summons of yours, but I've never actually seen you summon anything before.
What even is your summoning contract? Deidara asked abruptly, his curiosity rising once again as he eyed Naruto curiously. Taking in his clawed hands and feet, his amber eyes and his shaggy silver-colored hair as he did so. Noting that Naruto was a unique-looking guy, but even so Deidara wasn't sure whether his appearance was a natural trait he was born with or whether it had anything to do with him being a self-proclaimed sage, or his summoning contract.
We're here. Naruto spoke up, completely dismissing Deidara's questions.
After all, his summoning contract was a sacred thing to him. He wouldn't just summon the wolves for no reason. Nor was he that keen on giving out information that may one day be used against him. He might not be a shinobi in the traditional sense, but he was paranoid and suspicious enough to not give up information he didn't need to.
At Naruto's words, all three of them came to a halt, pausing in a nearby clearing a mile or so from the edge of the forest in the Leaf Village. All three of them spreading out their senses as they did so, with Naruto, whose sensory abilities were far beyond the others, cautiously searching out all the nearby presences, ensuring that they were not in danger of someone accidentally coming across them. And where is, here, exactly? Yeah. This is just some random clearing. The hidden leaf is still about like a mile that way. Why don't we just go straight there and get this brilliant plan of yours over and done with? Deidara said loudly, a scowl on his face as he looked over at where Naruto was crouched. Despite his frustration though, he didn't make a move to go past him. He had after all learned over the years that he'd spent with Kin and Naruto that the other teens' sensory abilities were surpassed by none, except maybe Zetsu and Pain.
Which meant that when he said to stop, you stopped, even if it was in the middle of the woods for no discernible reason. Of course there was another reason to stop, and that was Naruto's temper. Which was truly terrifying when he was provoked. Luckily though he was calm and controlled for the most part, only giving way to anger when Kin was in danger or when someone really pissed him off. Which is something Deidara had somewhat of a talent for. Naruto in response, completely ignored Deidara as he calmly went through a number of seals. His clawed hands moving slowly and carefully, a look of deep concentration on his face. Before a half minute or so later, He finished making the dozen or so seals and instead put his right hand on Kin's chest, while his left hand took a place on Deidara's. Much to Deidara's consternation as he shot Naruto a scowl, but didn't knock his hand away. Naruto didn't do anything without a purpose after all. Kin meanwhile shifted awkwardly, her cheeks heating up as she shot Naruto a longing look, her heart beating faster as she felt the warmth of his palm on her chest. Before either of them could say anything though, a sealing matrix spread out from Naruto's clawed hands, running across both of their bodies before fading. After which Naruto took his hands away and instead did the same to himself, a sealing matrix once again spreading out from his hand and encircling his own chest.
What did you just do? Kin asked curiously, one of her hands coming up to rub at the area Naruto had placed his hand. Deidara grunting as he too looked to the amber-eyed teen for answers. The hidden leaf is surrounded by a sealed dome, which alerts a team of highly trained leaf shinobi, known as Anbu, about anyone unauthorized person with a large chakra signature entering the village limits. Naruto replied brusquely as he turned and started to make his way to the village, moving cautiously this time as he did so. Their protections don't pick up on low chakra levels though, like those that animals and civilians have, so trade is fairly unrestricted. As for the leaf shinobi, each of them have their chakra signature added to the dome grand matrix after graduation, which allows them to pass the dome undetected. What I just did is an Anbu seal which will allow us to pass through the dome unmolested.
If there's some all-seeing seal dome around the village, how come I've never heard of it before? Deidara asked curiously as he looked over to Naruto.
I'd assume because it's a hidden village. Kin answered dryly, a bland look on her face as she looked over to the blonde. They keep secrets. Then how did he find out about it? Yeah. Deidara asked, a flash of annoyance passing through him as he looked between the other two.
I was able to sense. It's after all drawing a lot of chakra from the earth in order to power it. The entire thing is an Uzumaki-based design apparently, one set up when that clan was at its peak before the Second Shinobi War. But even so, I wouldn't have been able to guess its function. Luckily though Itachi, as a former high-ranking shinobi from the Leaf, filled me in on the details. Naruto replied calmly, his gaze fixed on the nearby village, his eyes turning red as he activated his dujutsu, which allowed him to just about pick up on the translucent dome around the hidden village. The Uchiha told you that, yeah? I thought you two hated each other. Deidara asked bluntly, quite surprised that Itachi Uchiha would be so helpful, especially when it was common knowledge to the other members of the Akatsuki that he considered Naruto a battle-hungry savage and Kin a little girl out of her depths. The guy's an ass, but even he fears the wrath of pain. Naruto replied, a slight scowl on his face at the thought of the pretentious and arrogant Uchiha. Which basically means that Pain commanded Itachi to aid you in any way he can, so Itachi started giving away Leaf Village secrets. Kin spoke up, expanding on Naruto's explanation for the benefit of Deidara. Though he might also be doing it because he wants to limit the collateral damage to the Leaf Village, he does have a brother there after all, doesn't he? Yeah, but I doubt they get along. After all, Itachi did slaughter their entire clan apart from his bratty brother. The kid probably hates Itachi, and Itachi can't be all that fond of him, yeah. Deidara said, thinking back to the infamous Uchiha massacre as he did, an event that had shocked the whole continent and had cemented Itachi Uchiha's place as one of the most powerful and ruthless missing nin currently alive.
Then why did he leave his brother alive then? Kin asked. Maybe it's because he still cares for him, which might also be why he's helping us.
Whatever, who cares about the Uchiha anyway? Though I'll admit, those Sharingan eyes they have are pretty cool. Not on the same level of my art of course, but they're up there. Deidara replied, a thoughtful expression on his face.
Naruto turned his red eyes to Deidara as he heard that, the red fading back to amber as he stopped channeling chakra to them. A contemplative expression on his face. They do sound quite deadly. The ability to predict another movements, copy some of their techniques and cast genjutsu with eye contact.
You thinking of getting yourself a pair as a trophy? Kin asked curiously. After all, Naruto often took trophies. His dujutsu was one example, as two were the Kiba blades he had sealed in the hilt of his sword. It was a trait Kin too had adapted, as it was where she had gotten her armor and weapons from, the corpses of particularly deadly foes. Not as a trophy, Naruto replied quietly, his gaze shifting to Kin. More as a gift. Kin frowned as she heard that, but wasn't able to ask any more questions as they had reached their destination. The three of them all silently scaling the walls around the Leaf Village and entering undetected. Their presence is hidden by the seal Naruto had done before, one shown to him by Itachi. About 10 minutes later found the trio walking along the Leaf Village's high street. Both Kin and Naruto looking around curiously, as this was the first great village either of the two had seen. On top of which this was also the place that Naruto's parents lived, and where they died. So walking through the bustling streets came with a bit of a strange feeling for Naruto. As they walked along the high street, the three of them also noticed that there seemed to be quite a lot of building work going on. As a number of the buildings had scaffolding on their frontage, whilst others having boards on their windows. Though considering that they'd just been through a minor war, this was something that should have been expected. Still it was impressive to see the resilience of the residents, both shinobi and civilians alike, as the streets were busy, the Leaf Village looking well on the way to recovery. "You know, I hear there is a place in the village that does great ramen," Kin said, a slight smile on her face as she looked over to Naruto. Naruto cocked an eyebrow at that, the silver-haired man having grown somewhat of a taste for the unhealthy noodle dish since he had begun traveling the elemental nations. "Let's check it out then. Really, ramen? Isn't there a better place that does, you know, proper food instead of that peasant dish? Besides, I thought we were supposed to be following your master plan whilst we're here," Deidara said waspishly as he looked around at their surroundings, noticing that their similar garb was not drawing as much attention as he had thought it would. Though then again the Akatsuki weren't that well known yet, at least not to the wider shinobi population. Plus living in a shinobi village, extravagance and flamboyancy of style was not something that would draw too much attention. "That's what we are doing. What better place to begin asking around than a popular noodle shop?" Naruto replied blandly. "That's just an excuse and you know it," Deidara snapped back. "Shut up, Deidara, you've been outvoted," Kin retort, a slight smile on her face as she saw the blonde's frustration. "This is bullshit," Deidara muttered, grumbling to himself as he followed the other two through the busy streets into a stall with a big sign over the top saying, "Ichiraku Ramen."
Soon enough the three were all sat on stools in the front of the stall, waiting patiently for a pretty brunette waitress to bring them their meals. As they were doing this, the three of them also took the opportunity to ask some passers-by about what happened, and what the cause was. The three of them linking it back to the infamous Nine Tails attack many years ago.
Yeah, apparently part of the reason there was so much damage is because the hidden sand brought along their Jinchuriki, a real psycho that crushed anyone he could with his sand, if you can believe it. A pudgy civilian said loudly, his jowls wobbling as he shook his head in disgust. How anyone can trust animals like those to be shinobi I'll never know.
And yeah, I've heard every village has a similar problem. Though I'm not surprised they had so much trouble controlling them, after all they are beasts. Deidara replied back, feigning a friendly demeanor as he tried to coax information out of the civilian. "Yeah. I mean, I don't know how the Leaf Village controls their Jinchuriki as well as they do," Kin added in, a kind smile on her face as she pushed a lock of her black hair behind her ears. "You just need to treat them the right way is all. They're like animals after all, you've got to be strict with them, punish them if they get out of line and don't spoil them," the fat man replied back with a laugh.
"And how did that work out for you?" Kin asked curiously. "Well, we've had no trouble since the Nine Tails attack many years back. No, we keep that Sora brat in line, you don't need to worry about that," the civilian continued, a lascivious look appearing in his eyes as he saw he had Kin's full attention, his gaze roving up and down her lithe body and flawless features. "Oh, I'm ever so impressed, but where do you keep him? I take it's far away from schools and hospitals," Kin continued on, leaning forward slightly as she did so, purposefully showing off her modest cleavage. "Yeah, of course, the old Hokage, may he rest in peace, gave the brat a shitty apartment not that far from here, where the shinobi of the village can keep an eye on him," the fat man responded, a bead of sweat running down his forehead as his gaze flickered down to Kin's assets. Before they could say any more, however, they were distracted by the waitress returning with their food, which prompted Kin to politely dismiss the other man, happy that she'd gotten as much as she could from him. "So what do you reckon?" Deidara muttered to Naruto as he watched the fat man waddle off, a scowl on his face. "We've done enough to get the attention of some of the Leaf shinobi at least. I can already feel a couple of them watching us. Naruto replied quietly as he took his chopsticks and began to devour his food.
And if they attack us? Deidara responded, between mouthfuls of his own food.
Then we kill them, and leave Konoha. After which we follow the plan and track down the Jinchuriki when they try to get him out of the village. Naruto responded bluntly, knowing as he did that there were a lot of variables to the plan. Then again there always were when you were hunting something so dangerous and so well protected. A few minutes later, the three teenage members of Akatsuki eventually finished their lunch without event, if one ignored the simply insane amounts of food Naruto consumed within the time it took both Deidara and Kin to finish a single bowl. His excuse being that he had a high metabolism. Not that Deidara cared that much, as he had already decided to throw Naruto under the bus if Kakuzu asked why they had spent more than the allotted amount money they'd been given for this mission. Which of course would happen, since Kakuzu's allotted amount practically had them paying him out of their own pocket, as opposed to them actually getting money out of the tall, bad-tempered bounty hunter. One who held a particular grudge against Naruto, who had become his main rival over the last few years, robbing the former hidden waterfall shinobi of a lot of potential bounties and the rewards which went with them. As they continued down the high street though, Naruto soon veered off to the left, away from the bustle of the main street, as he instead led them in the direction of a nearby canal. Not that either of them asked why, as both Kin and Deidara had picked up on the shinobi following them just as Naruto had. One of whom was not as subtle as they must have thought they were, Naruto's nose having picked up the scent of tobacco in the air back whilst they were eating ramen.
So how do you want to do this? Kin asked quietly as the three of them came to a sudden stop, Kin's hand resting on her sheathed tanto. Loudly and explosively. Deidara grinned, flexing his hands and revealing what looked like mouths on his palms. As quickly and efficiently as possible. Naruto corrected, his own amber eyes quite placid as he turned around, his claws gleaming in the midday sun. In response to the group's sudden actions, their followers decided to reveal themselves, with two figures leaping off of the roof of a nearby building, and landing several yards away from where the three Akatsuki members were waiting. An amused look spread across Naruto's face as he saw this, his amber eyes fixing on the two as he looked the two stalkers up and down.
One of them was a tall, well-built man, with dark spiky hair and a beard. A cocky smile on his face and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, as he placed his hands on the hilts of two sheathed trench knives he had on him. His gaze evaluating the three Akatsuki members, just as they were doing the same to him. Their other stalker meanwhile was an attractive dark-haired woman, with piercing red eyes and a heavy coating of makeup on. Her outfit consisting of what looked like thick bandages that were intricately wrapped around her. Like her fellow Leaf Shinobi, she too was giving the three a suspicious look, though hers was one of caution as opposed to overconfidence.
Who are you? And what business do you have in Konoha? The male Leaf Shinobi asked bluntly, his feet shifting as he took up in a relaxed but ready stance, clearly preparing to fight at any moment.
We're simply artists and collectors. We were looking for quite the rare piece here in the Leaf actually. Once we heard it might be here, we came as soon as we were able. After all, there are only 9 pieces like it in the world. Deidara said, a slight mocking tone to his voice as he not so subtly referenced the Jinchuriki. His fingers once again twitching as he prepared to lash out at any moment.
Somehow I doubt your story. The three of you are clearly trained and dangerous, so we'll ask again. Why are the three of you here? The red-eyed woman asked as she shifted to fully face them, moving into a more practical position for hand seals as she began to build up her chakra, ready to leap into action at any moment. Oh, for fuck's sake, yeah. Let's just get this over with. Deidara snapped, the hot-headed teen's patience evaporating as he instead raised his hands. We're here looking for the 9 tails. Hand him over, and we won't level this place.
Deidara, can I just remind you, we're here to gather information, not start a war. Let me handle this, Naruto said calmly, his amber eyes shifting to the side briefly as he sensed a small chakra retreating. One that he had almost missed due to the two Junin flaring their own chakra right in front of him, luckily though his sensory abilities were far beyond those of the average shinobi. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto assumed that the two in front of him were only here to buy time for their weaker comrade to go and warn someone, presumably the Jinchuriki and whoever was guarding him. Which was good, as this was one of the outcomes Naruto had thought would come from his plan. Not that Naruto said anything about it, as he instead turned his attention to the two hidden leaf shinobi in front him. So if you could just tell us where he is, we'll leave with no trouble.
What are you doing? Deidara muttered, as he heard Naruto comment, confused about what the feral-looking man was up to. Seems like we're improvising. Kin added on dryly, a faintly amused expression on her face. Again.
I'm afraid Sora isn't in Konoha at the moment, but you won't be around when he gets back, so don't worry. The man snapped back as he jumped into action a moment later, no doubt hoping to surprise his three opponents, allowing him to incapacitate them before they had a chance to fight back.
Not that this worked though, because after he said this the man pulled out his two trench knives and dashed forward. The leaf Junin moving so fast that to a civilian he'd be little more than a blur, his two knives each covered in a barely visible shimmer of chakra.
For Naruto, though, with his senjutsu enhanced speed, strength and reflexes, was easily able to keep up with the man's speed, as he shot forwards. His amber eyes locked on his opponent and a slight snarl on his face as he met the man mid-charge. Moving in close, Naruto raised his left arm to take the man's knife strike, his right-clawed right hand coming up to disembowel his attacker. Trusting in the durability his sage maid gave him to protect him, even if the wolf's senjutsu style did not offer him the same durability of the toad's. With his style being more suited to offense as opposed to defense, despite that though his flesh was still as hard as stone. Which is why he was so surprised that the man's knives drew blood as they slashed into his left arm, leaving 2.5 centimeter cuts in his muscled forearm. Not that Naruto paused to take this in, as he easily ignored the slight twinge of pain and instead followed through with his attack. His claws shearing through the man's flak jacket and drawing blood as they tore through the upper layer of his flesh. Unfortunately though, he didn't disembowel the man like he had planned, as the Junin had instead reacted quickly and leapt backward. His knives whistling through the air as he lengthened the chakra he was running through them and slashed at Naruto's extended arms.
Naruto, however, was warier this time, as he shifted down low before moving up, one of his hands moving up to grip the man's left hand, whilst he held the other flat like a spear blade and plunged it towards the Junin's chest. The Konoha shinobi reacted quickly though as he shifted his hand back and turned it to the side, leaving a shallow cut on Naruto's palm as his hand clenched around both the Junin's knife and hand. Not that that stopped Naruto from crushing his opponent's hand, shattering the man's bones against the hilt of his blade. His claws digging into the back of his hand causing even more damage as he did so. The knife wielder cried out at that, his voice tinged with agony as he flinched backwards, trying to pull away from Naruto. Which actually saved his life as Naruto's hand clipped his shoulder, rending flesh and bone but not causing any fatal damage to his organ as was intended. Letting go of the man, Naruto threw him backwards. A scowl on his face as he looked at the wound on his hand, seeing his blood for the first time in years. Just looking at it, Naruto noted that the chakra blades would have certainly bisected a normal human. Fortunately though, Naruto's flesh was like iron, but still it was impressive that the man's technique had done as much as it had. Snarling, Naruto lunged forwards, his wounds already healing as he went to finish off the annoying leaf Junin. Any compassion he might have had for the residents of his parents' old home, vanishing as anger flashed through Naruto's mind. As this was happening, Kin had gone for the woman, her tanto already in hand as she shot forwards. Her lips pursed as she let out a high-pitched whistle, casting a sound-based genjutsu on her, aiming to paralyze the other woman, which would leave her open so Kin could close in on her and dispose of her quickly. Mid-step, however, she was stopped by the branches of a tree that exploded grown from the ground beneath her. Not that this stopped her for long, as she instead flared her chakra and broke the genjutsu the other woman had cast on her. Her eyes narrowed as she saw her target was the one that had cast the illusion, a powerful illusion at that. The genjutsu wasn't just cast on her though, but on her two companions too, which is what Kin noticed as she glanced around, noting that Naruto had already broken the genjutsu, his eyes flashing red as he activated his dojutsu, breaking the genjutsu in an instant. The lucky bastard. As for Deidara, he too had broken the genjutsu, after which he had then begun shaping his clay. A grin on his face as he began crafting a massive owl, one which would be big enough to carry all three of them. The blonde multitasking as he did so, also creating a flock of small swallow-like birds at the same time, each one created from his explosive chakra-infused clay. Ignoring his two companions for a moment, Naruto was about to tear his attacker's head off, only for him to be stopped as he heard a loud crackling sound, like 1,000 chirping birds, coming from behind.
Shifting around in response, Naruto easily avoided a sneak attack from another leaf shinobi. His now red eyes flashing as he used both his dujutsu and sensory abilities to track his opponent, extending his senses as he did so and noticing that their little skirmish had started to draw even more attention from the village's forces. Leaping backwards, Naruto dodged another attack from his opponent, this one consisting of several dog-like creatures made out of lightning. His amber eyes narrowing as he weaved through them, before he clashed with the other shinobi. His clawed hands cleaving through his attacker's kunai, the man in question being a masked shinobi with spiky gray hair, and his forehead protector covering one of his eyes. This was Kakashi Hatake, the copy ninja, an S-rank shinobi Naruto recognized from a number of bounty posters. Lashing out with his foot, Naruto seemingly broke the man's spine. Only for his opponent to turn into a shattered log, not that this surprised Naruto as he shifted around with a quick jab. Landing a punch on his opponent's real body this time, his punch breaking a few ribs and causing a bit of internal damage as he sent Kakashi crashing into a nearby building with an exclamation of shock.
Deidara, now. Naruto said abruptly as he turned from his two, temporarily incapacitated foes. His gaze instead shifting to his two companions, noting as he did that Kin's opponent, the red-eyed woman, was now clutching her stomach, her hands stained red with blood. A pained expression on her face as she attempted to hold off Kin, whilst also stopping herself from bleeding out.
Kin herself looking only slightly ruffled as she held her bloodied tanto in her right hand. A scowl on her face as she and her opponent dueled in a battle of both combat prowess and skill in genjutsu. Kin coming out the better of the two, her sound-based genjutsu being far more difficult to counter than her opponent's more traditional techniques.
As for Deidara, he was currently standing atop a massive owl made of white clay. A grin on his face as his creation started flapping its mighty wings taking to the air.
Kin, Naruto called out abruptly as he leapt up off the ground and landed on the back of the owl. Kin following after him, as she shot her opponent a slight smirk, before she jumped up, pushing off the side of a building and landing on the owl as she did so. Boarding her right out of here just as it rose into the air, almost out of reach. And now the distraction. Deidara grinned as he looked down on where they had just been, noting that the gray-haired man and the woman had both recovered enough to stare up at them. Their knife-wielding friend however was still down for the moment. Grinning wider as he saw this, Deidara then unleashed his flock of clay swallows. More than a dozen of the little birds descending on the streets of the village as he did so.
Katsu. In the air above the village hidden in the leaves.
Looking down on the village hidden in the leaves, a vicious smile spread across Deidara's face as he watched his clay creations explode, each of them erupting in explosive blasts of varying sizes, depending on the amount of clay he used.
Each of his explosive clay constructs causing masses of damage and destruction, as they brought down buildings and collapsed bridges, scattering the shinobi in the streets below as they dodged out of the way of the falling rubble, or moved to safeguard the hidden village's civilian population.
Flying higher into the air on their clay bird, the group of three quickly rose far beyond the range of most techniques as they began to soar away, disappearing into the thicket blanket of clouds above them, even as the shinobi village below them erupted into chaos, as civilians shouted and screamed, fleeing from the imminent danger of collapsing buildings and explosion in terror. Many of them no doubt coming to the conclusion that the not-so-hidden village was being invaded, again, so soon after it had just begun to recover from the last invasion. Unlike the civilians though, the shinobi of the hidden village reacted far differently, as within moments of the loud explosions the rooftops were swarming as hundreds of shinobi took to them, some of them, those not on duty heading for the epicenter of the disruption so they could investigate the threat, and then if necessary face it head-on. Others however, those on duty, headed for the village walls, the academy, the Hokage's tower, and other specific parts of the hidden village, securing all of the most important assets in case this was indeed an attack. All of them quickly slipping into their assigned roles with ease as they followed protocol, acting like a single well-oiled machine, and showing the world just why the Hidden Leaf was considered the most powerful of the 5 great hidden villages. They're certainly an organized bunch, aren't they? Naruto spoke up idly from where he was crouched on the edge of their mount, his amber eyes absent-mindedly scanning the hidden village below as if he was looking for something. His expression revealing no real concern despite the chaos they had just caused. It's a heavily militarized shinobi village. Are you really that surprised?
Kin asked from where she was stood on the bird as it flew through the clouds, the dark-haired girl pushing away her discomfort as the cold, wet air began to soak through her clothing as she instead looked down at the hidden village too, her own gaze slightly more conflicted than her partner's. It's almost like watching an ant's nest that's just been disturbed, isn't it? Yes, but far more dangerous. Naruto muttered, as he looked down at his palm and the shallow cut that was still healing upon it. His amber eyes narrowing at the sight of the minor injury, even as he watched as it began to rapidly heal, a scowl spreading across his face as he thought back to that pesky, bearded Junin and how his wind-enshrouded blades had managed to pierce his skin. This happening despite him being in Sage mode, which naturally enhanced his durability.
Though admittedly not as much as it enhanced his other attributes such as speed, strength and his senses. Still it made him durable enough that a simple blade couldn't breach his skin, which is why he had come to the conclusion that the Junin from before had used some kind of chakra nature, most probably a wind element to sharpen his blade. A technique Naruto had at least heard of, even if it was not one that he knew how to use personally.
You're injured. Kin suddenly said as she tore her eyes away from the scene of chaos below and instead took a step toward Naruto, a flash of concern passing through her eyes as she noticed the blood staining his hand.
It's nothing, Naruto muttered, clenching his hand into a fist as he did so, and instead looking back down at the hidden village, his gaze shifting away from the swiftly moving forces that were already securing the village and evacuating the affected areas, even as he watched, and instead to the surrounding forests, where he was just able to pick out two figures hurriedly leaving the hidden village, before they began running through the trees. Ha, you got injured by some treehugger. I thought you were supposed to be tough, yeah. Deidara suddenly laughed obnoxiously as he looked over at Naruto, a manic grin on the blonde's face as he saw evidence that the seemingly indomitable and intimidating bounty hunter wasn't as invincible as he liked to pretend he was. Fuck off Deidara, the guy got lucky. Naruto replied as he wiped his hand on his Akatsuki robes, before showing Deidara and Kin his now fully healed up hand. It won't happen again. But anyway, back on the mission at hand, it looks like they have taken the bait and gone to warn the Jinchuriki of our presence. So stop waiting around and follow them. HN. Deidara grunted in response, a bit disappointed with Naruto's dismissive reaction, before he instead pushed back his long blonde fringe, and used the binocular-like device on his right eye to zoom in on the running shinobi. Yeah, it looks like your plan worked.
It almost sounds like you're disappointed. Kin said absent-mindedly as she began to clean the blood off of her tanto, using Deidara's robes to do so.
Oi, stop that, Deidara snapped as he saw what she was doing, pulling his robes out of her reach as he did so. And fuck no, I'm glad we finally get some action. Still, it would have been funny to mock your boyfriend about the failure of his plan.
He's not my boyfriend. Kin shot back, her face going very red as she avoided looking at Naruto and instead glared at Deidara, her hand twitching as she resisted the sudden urge to throw her knife at the annoying man. Just do your job and fly the bird. Naruto snapped, pushing down his slight disappointment at Kin's words as he instead glared at Deidara. Or else I'll rip out your spine and flay you alive with it.
You know, the more you threaten me, the less impact it has. Deidara replied petulantly, as he folded his arms and willed his clay construct onward, his gaze now back on the running shinobi below, content just to follow them for now, as they would hopefully lead them to right where the Jinchuriki was.
They're not threats, Deidara, they're promises. Naruto shot back dryly as he got to his feet, patting Kin on the shoulder lightly as he walked to the front of the bird so he could keep an eye on the two shinobi too, restraining himself from ordering the bird down so they could hunt them on foot like he preferred. After all, the aerial advantage Deidara's constructs gave them was not something to just ignore.
It was as he did this, that he didn't notice how Kin relaxed slightly into his touch, her cheeks once again pinking as her dark eyes fixed on Naruto's broad back, a pang of longing passing through her, before she ruthlessly pushed it down, and instead focused on the matter at hand.
Outside of the Leaf Village, it was as chaos in the Leaf Village was unfolding, and the shinobi forces were being unleashed, that both Shikamaru and Shoji left the village.
The both of them running as fast as they could through the forests outside of the walled village, the pair of them soon taking to the trees, and leaping from branch to branch as they quickened their pace. The both of them moving as quickly as they could, eating up the distance as they ran in the opposite direction of the Leaf Village, and the large black plumes of smoke that were rising from it. Leading the duo was Shikamaru Nara, a tall, thin teen, with long dark hair tied up in a top knot,
who usually had a disinterested look on his face, though now he had an expression of intense concentration on his face as she leapt from branch to branch. His childhood friend and teammate, Choji Akamichi, following along quickly after him as he did so. The rotund, brown-haired teen with face paint on his cheeks, almost the exact opposite of Shikamaru, in both character and appearance, hurrying along behind him, huffing and puffing as he tried to keep up. The pair of them both running as fast as they could from their home, though not because they were scared though, but because they needed to warn someone about what was coming. With the someone being the third and final member of their team, Team 10, another teen, and recent graduate from the Leaf's Shinobi Academy, Sora. A boy who, despite being abrasive, crass and a bit of a jerk, most of them was still their comrade, which meant that now he was in danger, it was up to them to warn him of what was coming and help him defend himself against it. Already Asuma Sarutobi, their Junin sensei, and Kurenai Yuhi, another Junin sensei for a different genin team, had apparently been rushed to the hospital with severe injuries due to the most recent attack on the Leaf Village. One which had apparently been orchestrated by a group of 3 powerful shinobi, all 3 of whom had been looking for Sora.
With both Shikamaru and Choji having been present to witness the beginning of the attack, which had allowed them to see just how dangerous the 3 of them were if they could take down 2 Junin and hold off another one. With them having heard of Asuma and Kurenai's fate as they left the village. Which is of course why they were doing what they were, as since the Junin present were either hospitalized or busy putting out fires, or evacuating civilians, it was up to the 2 of them to warn their comrade about his pursuers, as by the time things had settled down long enough for the now leaderless hidden village to make sense of the situation, it might be too late. Fortunately Sora was a loudmouth, and so it hadn't taken long for Shikamaru to find out that the obnoxious boy had left the village a couple of days before with Jiraiya of the Sannin, in order to find the older man's teammate, Tsunade Senju of the Sannin, both so she could become the next Hokage of the Leaf, and also use her legendary skills at healing to help those that were still injured from the invasion. With the previous Hokage, the third, having fallen in battle against Orochimaru, slain in cold blood by his former student.
Despite that painful loss though, the Leaf Village had for the most part fought off the invasion by both the hidden sand and sound with limited casualties.
Their forces had of course taken a hit, but as opposed to that hit being devastating and crippling like it could potentially have been, it was negligible. And as soon as they got a new Hokage in the seat of power, then the hidden Leaf would begin recover, and quickly, which was good, considering the other shinobi villages, all of whom were probably watching the Leaf Village, searching for any weakness they could easily take advantage of. That being said, despite having fought off the invasion, Shikamaru also knew that there would be certain people that would want revenge on their former ally, the Hidden Sand, despite the Leaf Village being slightly weakened. Fortunately though, he also knew that most people didn't want to spark another war. Both sides had lost enough already, further conflict would just drag in the other nations and shinobi villages. Fortunately, before all this had happened, Shikamaru, inquisitive as ever, had found out from his father that both Sora and Jiraiya were going to be starting their search for Tsunade, in Tanzaku Town, a small tourist community that was not too far from the hidden village. Which meant that the 2 of them should hopefully not be that hard to find, so they could be warned about the 3 shinobi wearing black cloaks, with red clouds. Of course that is not to say that Shikamaru didn't think Jiraiya could handle himself, despite being outnumbered. The older man was a legend after all, an S-rank shinobi and one of the strangest in the elemental nations. But the element of surprise had killed many shinobi before, and would continue to kill many after. After all, sneak attacks and stealth were a shinobi's most deadly tools, and considering there were 3 of them he might be facing, then Jiraiya could be in a lot of trouble. However, if Jiraiya knew about the threat beforehand, then half the battle was already won, as the Sannin could either retreat or make preparations to meet the threat head-on if he had to. Either way, with the information they were bringing, he would be prepared, and Sora would hopefully be safe. They could only hope their sensei Asuma was as well, as they had not had the chance to check on the older man before they had left. It was only 2 or so hours later that the 2 friends finally arrived at Tanzaku Town, the pair of them both quite tired after hightailing it there all the way. Despite that though, they both continued as they set out to track down Sora, which should be pretty easy to find considering his loud, attention-seeking personality, and his distinct appearance, what with the bandaged arm and blue hair.
Of course that was easier said than done, as the 2 of them soon found that Tanzuka Town was a lot more sprawling than the Leaf Village, with the Hidden Leaf being just a large, but with it also being designed around utility and defense, with distinct districts and large open streets. Tanzuka Town, in comparison, was the complete opposite. Still, despite the difficulties, the two quickly got down to track Sora down, asking anyone they could about people of their description, and where these people might be staying. After all, someone had to know, didn't they?
It was as the two were doing this that, unnoticed by the both of them, a large, clay bird began to descend from the sky, before it began circling in the darkening skies above the town, still partially concealed by the clouds. With Naruto hovering above Tanzuku Town, doing lazy circles on the clay bird, Naruto, Kin and Deidara began to prepare for the confrontation ahead. The three of them having just arrived at the town after following a couple of young and impetuous shinobi who had left the village soon after their attack. "Where did those brats go?" Deidara asked as he controlled his clay construct, playing with the binocular-like eyepiece on his right eye as he tried to find the brats they had followed here, the ones, due to the timing of their departure and their haste, that they had assumed had come to this innocuous town, to warn the Jinchuriki of their pursuit.
"It doesn't matter, we don't need them anymore. Start flying around the town, and keep out of sight while I try and find the Jinchuriki," Naruto replied brusquely as he crouched down and spread his senses, uncaring of fate or whereabouts of the leaf shinobi that had brought them here, as he instead tried to find their quarry.
With him using his senjutsu-enhanced sensory abilities to try and track down the enemy by the size of their chakra reserves, with Naruto having gone with the assumption that the Jinchuriki would have colossal reserves. That being said, his sensory abilities, although far below an average shinobi's, were not perfect, hence why he needed Deidara to ferry him around the town on the bird, so he could try and find his quarry from the air. "Any luck?" Kin asked from beside him, her own dark eyes scanning the town below, as she tried to find the leaf shinobi from before. Not quite as quick to dismiss them as Naruto and Deidara had. After all, they had come here for a reason, to warn the Jinchuriki, and an unprepared foe was a lot easier to deal with than a prepared one.
"There is 3 large chakra signatures in the town that I can sense," Naruto muttered, his brow furrowed as he assessed the 3 different signatures, all of which are large enough to be a potential Jinchuriki. "Well shit, this is a bit of a fuck up, isn't it?" Deidara spoke up mockingly. "So we've potentially found the 9-tailed Jinchuriki, but he's got friends. I'm guessing they're the ones that were sent to protect him?"
"Quiet," Naruto grunted as he tried to focus in on the signatures, scowling as he tried to infer which one might be the Jinchuriki. "The one we are looking for is over there. He's weaker than the other 2, but his chakra has a small amount of the tailed beast's energy running through it," Naruto continued, pointing off in the direction of a small, dreary hotel on the edge of the town.
"And how do you know what a tailed beast's chakra feels like?" Deidara asked in amusement, cocking an eyebrow as he gave Naruto a mocking look. "Are you really complaining?" Kin snapped back, shutting Deidara up as she did so, though internally she was also curious about the blonde's question. After all, since when had he ever had any direct interaction with a tailed beast or a Jinchuriki, and if he had, why didn't she know about it? "I've met a Jinchuriki before," Naruto replied bluntly as he stood up, his gaze panning the town below them once more, before he focused on Deidara, his now glowing red eyes as he activated his dujutsu, daring the blonde to question his statement. Something Deidara didn't bother doing, as he instead just accepted the explanation and looked away from those cold, predatory eyes. After all, he didn't know all that much about his stoic partner's history, and so couldn't say whether he was lying or not. Kin, however, frowned as she immediately saw Naruto's answer as a deflection. Not that she was about to call him out on it, not here anyway. She would be asking for some answers later though, as the two of them were supposed to be partners, and as such he should have clued her in on this, just as she had told him everything about her. "The other one, the largest signature, is over near the town's bathhouses," Naruto then continued as he stood up and gestured at a rather posh-looking bathhouse on the other side of town, before he then pointed off towards the center of the small town. "As for the third, that one is in a bar in the town center." "Is there any other shinobi in the town?" Kin asked, her eyes now on Naruto, not at all bothered as his glowing red eyes turned on her. If anything, she basked in the way he looked at her, though personally she did prefer his amber, more lupine eyes. "I have trouble with the smaller chakra sources form this high up," Naruto replied grudgingly, "but even if there are, I shouldn't think they would be all that concerning to the 3 of us." Deidara nodded in agreement at that, before began to play with his telescopic eyeglass. "You need me to create a diversion? I could start dropping bombs in the town and draw some attention to the center, cause a spectacle that'll draw some of the Jinchuriki's protection away.
Naruto paused as he heard that, running though the benefits and negatives of such a tactic before he nodded. Cause a little chaos, get the civilians out onto the streets and panicking. But try to restrain yourself, we don't want a bloodbath.
Minimal civilian casualties if possible. Kin then added on, playing with her sharp tanto as she did so. This isn't a shinobi village we're messing with here. Who cares? Deidara replied irritably, somewhat surprised that the large, feral-looking bounty hunter would care for people he didn't know. He genuinely didn't seem like the type who would.
Naruto just shrugged at that, before glancing to Kin.
I care. So in case you want a sudden, swift and painful change of gender, control yourself.
Kin spoke up, a dark gleam in her eye as she eyed Deidara like he was a particularly loathsome animal that needed putting out of its misery. Her mind momentarily flicking back to the shinobi attack on her own home, and the deaths of those she held close to her heart. Attacking a shinobi village was one thing, they knew what they were getting into and were trained, but attack ordinary, untrained people just going about their lives, that was an entirely different thing.
Enough talk. Naruto said, placing a clawed hand gently on Kin's shoulder comfortingly as he could guess why she was so passionate about this, before he looked harshly at Deidara. You have a job to do, don't fuck it up. Deidara rolled his eyes at that, but still nodded. You do the same, yeah. Kin and I will pursue the Jinchuriki. Naruto then continued, before he ordered Deidara to drop them off in the town.
A few minutes later, it was a few minutes later that Deidara had smoothly, and quietly, brought his clay bird low enough to the ground, for both Naruto and Kin to safely leap off of it without incident, the two of them landing in a back alley, just behind the shabby hotel as they did so. Both of them on guard instantly as they eyed their surroundings, just in case of an ambush or any other trick a shinobi might have set up to defend their prized weapon. Only for nothing to happen, as their arrival had apparently gone completely unnoticed. After which Deidara had then gone off to make mischief, with no one paying attention to the ongoings as the trio took advantage of the high buildings and busy, bustling nature of the tourist destination, and the darkening skies as afternoon quickly turned into evening, and the darkness of night began to descend on the thriving, tourist destination. Looking up into the sky as Deidara vanished from sight, a slight scowl spread across Naruto's face. The blonde bomber was a wild card, one that was prone to rash decisions and bouts of petulant anger. The teen hadn't developed the cold ruthlessness of a hardened killer, instead he treated this whole thing like it was some big game. Naruto, however, although prone to bouts of anger and rashness on occasion himself, was for the most part different to Deidara. He was far more pragmatic in the way he approached things, weighing things up before acting. Sure, when there was in the midst of a good fight he could sometimes be overcome by the throes of battle, as everything turned red and he could feel his heart pumping faster, as the blood fury overcame him. In those times he could act rashly, and act out in anger, but such occurrences were few and far between, as for the most part Naruto treated his hunts as just that, a hunt, one which required speed, precision, commitment, and no hesitation. Which is why for the most part Naruto was careful, he was also not excessive, as he didn't wantonly cause destruction for the sake of destruction like Deidara did, nor did he revel in death and carnage like Hidan, or in money like Kakuza, or his hate like Itachi Uchiha. No, if anything he was more like both Kisame, in the way he exulted in the challenge of hunting down and facing a strong opponent. However, unlike the blue-skinned swordsman, he did not make a performance out of it. A fight after all was just that, a fight. It was swift and brutal, it required no flashy moves, or excessive attention-seeking techniques. It was with that thought in mind that Naruto sent Deidara one more look, faintly sensing his powerful chakra signature amongst the clouds, before he turned away. Hoping as he did so that Deidara didn't let his idiocy get the best of him, and also that the enemy didn't have anyone skilled at sensing chakra either, as although Naruto and Kin could mask their signature, Deidara could not. Plus Naruto knew that there were others out there who could do the same as him, or better in terms of sensing chakra. Which, if that were the case, meant that their element of surprise might just be a sham, and their opponents might be lying in wait for them, preparing to turn the hunters into the hunted. Come on. Naruto muttered to Kin, before he set off towards the hotel, trusting in his dark-haired companion to follow along. Coming. Kin replied quietly, pausing momentarily to look up at the sky as she did so, before she turned and left. With the dark-haired girl being just as concerned as Naruto about Deidara's lack of inhibition,
and the likelihood that he could mess up their plan.
It was a few minutes later that the two of them entered the hotel through the window of an adjacent room. With Naruto entering the hotel proper, his bare feet padding silently along the threadbare carpeted floors, his senses flared as he sniffed the air, trying to lock onto the Jinchuriki's scent, even as he activated his dujutsu. His amber eyes turning red as he began to look through the surrounding walls, searching for his quarry.
A part of him looking forward to fighting a Jinchuriki, if it put up a fight, and another part of him curious about just how this person came to hold the Nine Tails chakra within him, and whether this person would make a suitable replacement for Naruto himself in Pain's grand plan.
Whilst Naruto was doing this, Kin had run up one of the walls using her chakra, her footsteps silent as she crept across the rooftops, her tanto held at the ready, as her dark eyes flicked about her surroundings. The dark-haired girl pressing herself against the roof tiles as she prepared to back Naruto up at any moment, if necessary. Though for the moment her attention was also partly on Deidara as she saw him flying on the town, no doubt creating his explosive constructs. With Kin's eyes locking on the figure as he prepared to unleash hell, hoping as she did, that he did at least exercise some restraint.
This was a concern that Naruto himself also shared, though likely for a different reason, as despite their apparent confidence, Naruto, and likely Kin too, knew how dangerous their current mission was, as they were only a short distance from the Hidden Leaf village, and any prolonged conflict would bring both the wrath of the Hidden Leaf and the scorn of their elders in Akatsuki upon their heads. On top of which the proximity of the two powerful chakra signatures was somewhat concerning, though that concern would hopefully be mitigated by Deidara's distraction, which should also allow Naruto to quickly go in and capture the Jinchuriki.
Ideally Naruto would have liked to investigate the other two powerful chakra signatures, in case one, or both of them had a bounty on their heads, or they were a particularly challenging opponent. Unfortunately though the mission came first, besides once they found out he took the Jinchuriki he was sure they would come for him, so who knows, sometime in the future he could be facing off with them anyway.
Shaking those thoughts away, Naruto instead focused on the task at hand, already aware as he did so that Kin was prowling along the rooftops overhead. With that thought in mind, Naruto continued padding along the corridor of the sleazy hotel, before he came to a halt in front of a plain wooden door, one which he knew the Nine Tails Jinchuriki was hiding behind.
Moments later he calmly knocked on the door, knowing as he did so that despite his outward calm, internally he was a raging tumult of emotions. After all, if this leaf genin was really the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, or a suitable substitute, then that meant that Naruto was off the hook, and that he would no longer be one of the Akatsuki's potential targets, not that they knew that, yet.
And to keep it hidden all he had to do was continue to maintain his sage mode, and not use the Nine Tails chakra, something he had never used before, in front of an Akatsuki member, and he was home free. After which he could continue living his life how he wanted, whether that be that both Kin and himself remaining in the Akatsuki tracking down and defeating powerful opponents and doing S-rank missions for a lot of money, or whether it be that they leave and do something else, whatever that may be. Either way it meant that he could strike out on his own, without the worry of the group of S-rank shinobi working out what he was in pursuing Kin and himself. Then again he was pretty sure they wouldn't be all that keen if he were to leave the group, so the point may be moot.
Pushing those thoughts away for now, Naruto instead focused on the task at hand, as it was only a few moments after he had knocked on the door that it opened and a short, blue-haired kid with a bandaged arm revealed himself, a confused expression on his face and a leaf forehead protector proudly displayed upon his forehead.
Tilting his head at the sight of the boy, Naruto's amber eyes turned red as he activated his dujutsu.
To the average passerby, the boy was just an average kid, or at least an average kid with shinobi training. But to Naruto, with both his eyes and his sensory abilities, the boy's chakra was a raging sea of raw energy, most of it his own, but with trace amounts of the Nine Tails energy within him, with these trace amounts somehow enhancing the boy's natural reserves, both in terms of size and potency. Focusing on the source of the Nine Tails chakra, Naruto found the seal on the Jinchuriki's stomach, one which contained a chakra exactly like his own, though noticeably less than the amount Naruto knew he held. Then again that might be because of the type of seal he had, or the source of the Nine Tails chakra. There were likely factors involved that he couldn't comprehend. Either way the boy was the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, even if only a pseudo one, and that was good enough for Naruto. Grinning at this, Naruto showed off his sharpened canines as he tilted his head to one side, his eyes returning to amber as he stopped channeling chakra to them. The reason for this being the sudden explosions that began erupting in town behind him, as Deidara released his chakra-heavy blasts of exploding clay, blowing up buildings and scattering the crowds, even as the sound of screaming and panicking civilians started to fill the air. "Who the hell are you?" The boy before him snapped, his loud and obnoxious voice carrying quite far in the almost empty hallway. Not that Naruto was really bothered by this, as although he would likely not be getting the epic battle he was looking forward to, a job was a job, and he didn't like failing.
With that said, Naruto went to step forward and sucker punch the target, with a single Sage Mode enhanced blow. It would be an easy knockout, and would likely cause little more than a bit of internal bruising and a few broken ribs, no life-threatening injuries, but ones which would hopefully disable him and stop him from calling for help.
Only as he was doing this, he found couldn't move, as somehow the shadows within the hall had thickened, before suddenly binding around his body, completely immobilizing his arms and legs over the course of a few moments. Shadow Possession Technique complete. An unfamiliar voice announced behind Naruto, catching his attention as he once again flared chakra to his eyes and activated his dujutsu. "Seriously?" Naruto asked as he wrenched his body around, flaring his chakra and breaking the shadow's grip on him with ease as he turned to face the two young teens facing off against him. With one of them being a skinny kid with small to mid reserves, which already looked to be low, this one being the was using the shadows as Naruto could see them chakra-infused shadows linking to him, whilst behind him his chubby friend was already flaring his chakra and preparing an attack. Widening his eyes when he saw Naruto had already broken his technique, Shikamaru could do little more than look on horror, even as Choji unleashed his own attack. The two of them having tracked Sora down quite easily, the two of them only needing to ask a couple of people to narrow down where they were staying, and then a few inquiries to the hotel reception to find out which room. Both of them arriving just in time to meet one of the pursuers already confronting Sora. "Did you really think this would work?" Naruto continued on incredulously, as he wrenched his way through the boy's shadows as he tried to use them yet again, his red eyes fixed on the fat boy as he curled up into a ball and shot towards him, like a runaway boulder.
Snarling at that, Naruto lashed out with his hand, striking the human boulder rushing towards him in the side, and sending him hurtling into the wall. After which he then twisted and dodged the Jinchuriki's attack from behind, gripping the boy's arm instead and breaking it with a single twist, before he then wrenched it and flung him headfirst into a nearby wall. "How did you think this was going to go? That you'd try and ambush me, then what, that you'd somehow defeat me?" Naruto continued to ask, almost angry about how stupid this attack was. What did a pair of genin think they could actually take him on? It was embarrassing. Backtracking at that, Shikamaru's eyes widened in horror as Naruto walked towards him, his claws gleaming in the dim light of the hall and his eyes glowing red, leaving light trails through the air as he advanced on the younger teen.
"Shikamaru!" Choji shouted desperately, in a pained voice, before he exploded towards Naruto once again, his fist growing 10 times larger as he lashed out with a single, direct, forceful punch. "Choji, don't!" Shikamaru cried out, panicking now, as he finally realized the difference in skill between their opponent and them, a difference that no amount of planning and preparations could make up for. Despite that though, Shikamaru didn't give up as he extended his shadows once more, burning through the last of his chakra as he tried to immobilize his opponent long enough for Choji to land a blow that would hopefully incapacitate him, if only temporarily, but long enough so the three of them could run away and find some real help. Scowling at this, Naruto once again broke the shadow's grip, as he instead lunged forward, dodging beneath the clumsy, fat genin's strike, before lashing out and taking advantage of the opening. His clawed hand moving upwards as Naruto tore through the boy's stomach, partially disemboweling him, an action that caused a spray of blood to drench the silver-haired sage. Only for Naruto to then flick the boy off his hand with a look of disgust, sending the young teen smashing into a nearby wall, where he landed in a heap on the ground, still and unmoving, a pool of blood rapidly expanding around him.
"Choji!" Sora snarled as he pushed himself to his feet, his eyes now red and his broken arm quickly healing as he began to draw on the Nine Tails chakra.
"Choji!" Shikamaru also shouted desperately, his eyes wide and filled with horror as he looked from his still and bloodied best friend, to his red-eyed opponent in terror and fury. "What did you?" Shikamaru began to say, his voice pitching slightly as panic, anger and fear overtook all rationality, only to be halted in mid-sentence when he felt a heavy blow to the back of his head, his world going dark as he fell to the ground moments later. "Kin," Naruto said with a nod, as he looked at the dark-haired girl, who was absent-mindedly twirling her tanto in her hand as she stood over the still and unresponsive body of the Leaf Genin.
"I can't let you have all the fun now, can I?" Kin replied with a slight smile, before she nodded to a point just over Naruto's shoulder. "Don't forget the Jinchuriki, by the way."
Smiling slightly at that, Naruto rolled his eyes before he turned and watched as the Jinchuriki ran at him, his previously bandaged right arm now revealed, showing off a bestial arm with a set of claws extending from it. A loud scream of fury leaving the boy's mouth as he bull-rushed Naruto, his clawed hand trailing behind him, tearing deep furrows in the carpeted floor.
Tilting his head as he saw this, Naruto could almost taste the Jinchuriki's fury as wisps of orange chakra began to flow off his body, even as his claws began to glow a light green color, a similar technique to the one the Junin he had defeated earlier had used. Watching as the boy charged him, Naruto waited until the last moment, before he reacted, his eyes flashing red momentarily as he avoided the boy's clawed head as it slashed at him, before he twisted and lashed out with a closed fist. Aiming for a straight knockout, after all they needed the boy alive.
"Die!" Sora snarled as he spun on his heel and lunged for Naruto again, only to find himself facing a clenched fist, one which struck him in the side of the head, and smashed him off his feet and into a nearby wall, his mind spinning and his consciousness slowly slipping away as blood began to drip down one side of his face.
"I thought you were supposed to be watching my back," Naruto said calmly as he looked back at Kin, his gaze moving over the three downed genin as he did so.
"I was, but these fuckers must have got into the building before us. Besides they're just genin, what trouble could they actually give you?" Kin replied dismissively, as she eyed the three teens before looking down at the Jinchuriki, her gaze softening slightly. "He's so young."
Naruto frowned at that, before pausing. "You're too soft-hearted."
"Or maybe you're too hard-hearted." Kin shot back at him.
Naruto cocked an eyebrow at that, before he leant down and grabbed the all but unconscious Jinchuriki by the collar. "I held back, didn't I? I didn't kill them all like I could have done?" "No, just a bit of friendly maiming is all," Kin replied dryly. "They trained to be shinobi, it's an occupational hazard," Naruto said, as he began to leave the hotel, dragging the barely conscious Sora along behind him, even as he heard the explosions in the distance continue to sound off, though now the screams had faded, telling Naruto that Deidara was doing little more than demolition work now. Kin rolled her eyes at that, but didn't reply, partially because she couldn't refute that point.
"Now come on, we've lingered here too long as is. Deidara can only keep them distracted for so long," Naruto said as he continued down the corridor, increasing his pace as he heard the explosions in the distance beginning to fade.
Kin nodded at that, before running after him, casting one last look back at the two genin, before she shook her head and continued down the hallway after her partner.
Moments later, a few moments later, after the two Akatsuki members disappeared down the corridor, taking Sora with them, Shikamaru opened his eyes.
Letting out a slight cry of pain, the boy then began to crawl along the floor, the barely conscious Shikamaru slowly dragging himself over to where his friend Choji had fallen, his breathing ragged and his head pounding as he did so. He hadn't planned on the Akatsuki being this ridiculously powerful. The plan he had thought of was supposed to work. He was supposed to immobilize the older teen before he got to Sora, after which Choji's human boulder would then connect with the man and take him out. Following form that they would link up with Sora and then take the remaining members of the trio down one by one, using teamwork to accomplish the feat. After all, wasn't that what Asuma had been training them to do? It was supposed to be simple, but effective. But instead the attack had failed, and their efforts were shown to be paltry and futile as the older teen crushed them with no apparent effort. Choji had been crippled in moments, as too had Sora when the boy had realized what had happened, and then Shikamaru had then been taken out, with the last thing he remembered being a strike to the back of the head. Either by the older teen's clone, or by one of his compatriots. Either way their plan had failed and they had been decimated.
Despite that, though, he wasn't about to give up. Sora was a teammate, and dare he say it, a friend, and Choji was the closest thing he had to a brother. Shikamaru would not allow Akatsuki to win this easily. First he would help Choji, if the boy still lived, and then he would go after Sora. With that though in mind, Shikamaru struggled to his feet, his vision blurring as his head continued throb, and his knees almost buckling as he felt the warm feeling of blood running down from the back of his head. He knew he had no real hope of beating one of these three shinobi now, as he was, but as unlike him as it was, he would still try.
Shaking his head, Shikamaru took one step towards Choji, his eyes flickering over the large pool of blood surrounding him, and the great bloody tear in his gut, before he collapsed again, his vision blurring as he desperately tried to cling onto consciousness, before he looked up and found himself looking at a pig. "Hold still." A soft and unfamiliar voice then said, as he looked up and found himself looking at a pale-skinned woman, with short black hair and dark eyes. An intense expression on her face as she gently cradled him in her arms, her face pinching in concern as she looked from him to Choji. "Help is here." The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.